Goodness, it got so quiet in here.
When the chair sits down.
Oh, is that it? Yeah. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We will go ahead and get started this meeting of the Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee for March 18th, 2016. I want to welcome each member of the Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee here. And if I could ask Ms. Johnson to call the roll.
David Chu. Amy Finnegan. Eric Sauer.
Present.
Gotham Hans. Senator Jim Bell. Lee Tin. Lisa Bartlett.
Here.
Lauren Kay.
Here.
Martin Wax.
Here.
Pam O'Connor.
Here.
Richard Marcantonio. Robert Poitras. Steve Finnegan.
Here.
Chair Jim Medapper.
Here. And we realize we're one short of a quorum, I believe, today. A couple of issues with some of our members prevented this day from working on their calendar. So we'll use today's meeting as more of an update, not only to the members present, but also to the public that might be watching or in the future. And we'll certainly endeavor to make sure that for our June meeting, we have everybody present. And I think as we go through the agenda today, I don't expect this to be a real long meeting, but it's an important meeting in the sense that there's been a lot of things going on since we adopted the final report in November, and we went over the unveiling strategy at our meeting in Riverside in December. So as always, this is a meeting where we offer the public to comment on things. There's obviously the spots on item 2 and item 12 on the agenda. However, if anybody in the audience ever wants to talk on anything, just wave your hand, and we'd like to have you part of it. Ann has blue speaker cards that can get filled out, and we'd be more than happy to take your comment. And I would just want to say that I think for the meeting today, there's probably an opportunity for us as TAC members to kind of have a little bit of an open exchange on issues that we see going on out there. And I know Supervisor Bartlett, myself, Professor Wax, Mr. Finnegan, everybody, Eric's got things from his group that we could all perhaps report on that I think are important as we move forward. This whole issue of road charge, both within the state and nationally, is being talked about a lot more. There's some that obviously hate it, and there's some that are willing to give it a chance. Clearly, as I tell people, we are in a pilot. We're not forcing anybody to do anything. We're asking for volunteers to see what might work, and more importantly, what doesn't work. As I think everybody's figured out, the way we pay for transportation today, that is a tax charged on the gallon of gas purchased, is not a sustainable funding source for the long term. And as a result of that, not only does California, but the rest of the country better figure out a new system to pay for our transportation infrastructure, which is not only woefully underfunded already, but is on a trajectory for absolute collapse if we don't fix something, and fix something quickly. And so that's the whole purpose of this effort as a pilot pursuant to the legislation that the governor signed in 2014. So with that, since we don't have a quorum, we can't really approve the December 11th meeting minutes. However, we'll put those on the agenda for the June meeting. What I want to do now is kind of what I was just talking about, is kind of go around the table here, and let's have almost an open dialogue under item 4 on the agenda, which is committee member reports. Oh, I should first stop. Is there any member of the public that wishes to address the task force right now? All right, hearing none. And if there is, like I said, just wave your hand. Let's go to item 4 on the agenda, and that's the committee member reports. And I'd like to start with Eric, just because of going around the table, and we can just talk about some of the things that have been going on in your world with respect to road charge and transportation funding.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. We had at our annual membership conference, we had a presentation by Jim, and I just want to acknowledge his representation of this group and the pilot program. He really, I mean, he probably left to a standing ovation after he left our meeting. He was very informative. Obviously, our association and members have some concerns about the mechanics of how this would work, because you're basically you're making a wholesale change from a pretty easy, you pay at the pump, to a whole different type of structure and mechanism. And so there are some concerns, and we're trying to work through those concerns through the pilot. At that meeting, following the meeting, we were able to secure quite a number of our member carriers to participate in the pilot. And I think that's what's been working for us to get folks into the pilot, is kind of the one-on-one interaction and the discussion on what the pilot is all about. And as Jim says, it's not mandatory, it's just a pilot. And I think the perspective we have is we're looking at it combing through those issues and seeing if it's a viable option. And this is probably one of the better ways to do that. And so we're going to continue to discuss this item at our various meetings throughout the state. I have an audience with folks late March that I'm going to be talking about it there. But we've also been working with E-Road, who's working with the staff on providing the administrative services for folks that want to participate in the pilot. I've had multiple conversations with staff on developing the flyers and kind of the verbiage on walking our guys through it. And so we're still, I think we're pleasantly surprised with the number of folks that are participating right now. And so what I've been recommending to folks that want to participate in the pilot from our membership is volunteering multiple trucks, because one, we'll get a good, there's different, what we call lanes, and where they can, there's different routes they're going to be taking. They're not all taking the same route. So that's going to give a different barometer on the mileage that they're traveling to and from their businesses. And I think the focus on what we're going to be doing next is kind of walking through those guys, walking through the pilot participants on kind of clarifying that information and stuff. So I think we're on the path of getting folks up and running in the pilot. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, and again, I just want to express my appreciation to Eric and the Trucking Association, because not only is he leading and his group leading this in California, it's against a tide of skepticism, I guess would be a nice word, from the national organization. And I just want to express my appreciation. I think that clearly it's better to have a seat at the table than not, and I believe Eric has demonstrated that very well. And I think anything that we can do to work with the trucking industry, as we all want to, trucking needs better roads, trucking needs more improved access, better facilities. This is all part of that, and I think you guys get it. So thank you for that. Councilmember O'Connor.
Thanks. Oh, happy to be here down here in Orange County, Supervisor Bartlett. So, as Supervisor knows, SCAG is about to adopt its regional transportation plan with the sustainable community strategy, and the 2012 version of that, as well as the 2016, does have a vehicle miles traveled model as funding in future years. So we're committed to that, and I find that a number of the electeds at SCAG, they're itchy. They've been volunteers and they want to get started. So there's a subset of people who say, I want to be in that pilot. I want to be doing it, which is very exciting. But of course, it is a new concept to many people. I was recently at a conference with some electeds who are from more rural areas, and that ongoing concern about how this will impact those people who drive farther, and learning and understanding more about that. And the equity issues, certainly are out there when I'm talking to people and discussing it. And as I think we all know, there still is that disconnect between how roads are funded. People not understanding that, and then wondering, when I'm talking to a person who has no background, meaning like, if I'm talking to an elected at SCAG, they have some information. If I'm talking to more the regular person, they don't necessarily have any background in this and don't even pay attention or realize that necessarily that they pay a gas tax. So that you're starting from educating them at that point. And so I think the biggest concerns I've heard are a bit about the equity issues out there.
Okay, good point. Mr. Kay? There's a little button down there you gotta push.
Oh, look at that. Every microphone we've been at has been different. Well, I suppose, the only thing I'd really want to add, since talking about this to groups is not part of my day-to-day life, is to just express some concerns that I have, and that may not be answered today, and in fact may not even be the subject matter of today, but just to flag, particularly for the administration who's working on this, and that is that I'm concerned about the commitment and the priority that this project has in the administration. It's not that I've heard that it isn't a priority, but I haven't seen much evidence that it is. And in politics and public policy, evidence is seeing it usually exhibits whether or not it is a priority. Obviously, the key transportation public policy issue right now is getting more short-term finances. That's not going very well. And I'd say the prospects just, well, I'll say that as an organization, we're supportive of these efforts, but I think the politics of it are very, very difficult this year. And I'm wondering, and I'm just concerned that through either a strategic decision or a non-decision, the almost natural conflation of the gas tax and this issue is going to weaken the support for this issue. And I think that would be really unfortunate. It could undo a lot of the work that we've done here and undo the commitment that the legislature made in putting out this pilot project to begin with. So this is all in the nature of a caution and a complaint, not much in the way of a solution. I guess I would welcome the administration in addition to marketing the pilot project to possible participants. I'd welcome the administration stepping out and saying that this does represent the future of transportation finance after the necessary transition period and after the necessary infusion of more state transportation finances from current sources. But I am really concerned that as this issue becomes more known, the people who are skeptical of this, who don't want more gas taxes, who don't like the way transportation is financed, who don't trust the government to do the right thing on transportation finance, who think that it's all just a big ripoff, I'm afraid that they will be ascendant on this, and that the rest of us that want to see a sensible transition are going to be caught flat-footed and just fall behind on this. So it's probably not what you were asking for this morning.
Open forum.
But that's what's on my mind.
Very good points. Professor Wax, let's go back down to you.
I'd like to respond to the point about equity that has been made. And invariably, when people talk about equity, the rural-urban issue comes up. And I have been part of 2 studies which have used national data which make it crystal clear that, from the National Household Travel Survey, that the rural people are the winners, because not only do they drive more miles, but they also drive more fuel-inefficient vehicles. And when you take into account both, it turns out that the people who will lose the most from this program are urban Prius drivers, and the people who will gain the most are rural pickup truck drivers. And perhaps we, or somehow the agencies that are sponsoring this study, could make that part of the pattern, so that, because that issue keeps coming up over and over again, and it's just wrong. It's not an irrational perception, but it's factually incorrect.
And I'm just saying, and then it's hard to, to explain that when you're standing there on the street corner with someone, so maybe having some sort of elevator pitch to respond to that would be helpful.
And then maybe I could also respond to Lauren's point. I agree with everything you said. We're not trying to find a way to raise more money as much as we are trying to find a different architecture for raising money, a different structure for it. And whether we need to raise the gas tax in the short term and transition to a user fee in the long term, the rate of the user fee will be a political issue forever, and it has to be raised periodically just as a gas tax does. And I don't know if we can position our debate to emphasize that more clearly, to try to lessen the risk that that hostility toward increasing the gas tax will damage this effort. We could say, well, if you're hostile to the gas tax, you ought to consider this alternative because it's fairer in so many ways. Maybe it's a packaging or presentation strategy. I also should briefly mention, a week ago, I represented this group made a presentation to the 3 counties Institute of Transportation Engineers, Riverside, San Diego, and Orange, and gave a lunch talk presentation of where we are. And that audience, a technically well-informed audience, was very positive and very enthusiastic. And in fact, I found myself having to caution them. They raised a number of points that I've raised in the course of this discussion, and I realized that they're sort of politically beyond the pale. They were saying, well, this could replace local option sales taxes. It could be a part of the architecture for local government collections and so on. And I had to say, well, yeah, we discussed that, but we have to go slowly and in steps and so forth. But I would say that group, the technical transportation community that was represented there, was very positive about the pilot, and they seem to be anxious to sign up as volunteers. So, and then I guess Steve and Pam and I also made a presentation before the LA Metro Board that was much briefer and less favorably received. We were asked a number of clarifying questions. Nobody was particularly hostile, but the LA Metro Board is closely monitoring this project as well, and that's a big organization.
Well, thank you for that.
Hey, Jim, I have a question for Marty. Marty, when you had talked to those folks, were they talking about looking into the possibility of implementing kind of a local
Yes.
VMT?
Yes.
That's an administrative nightmare for our industry. That's something that we are scared to death of. The amount of jurisdictions that we travel through is just beyond.
if
I'm
that's-
sorry,
if that's
but
a motion,
I think
I'll second
the marginal administration could be small if there's a state program, and if the rate could vary slightly by geographic locality, and if a GPS, so-called general location of travel is recorded, it seems to me it can be done eventually, but certainly not in the short term.
Yeah. Yikes. Yes.
Fascinating. Supervisor Bartlett, and we should say thank you for hosting us in Orange County, the chairman of the Orange County Board of Supervisors.
Well, I just want to welcome everyone to our beautiful county here. It's a gorgeous day. So covering a couple things, and getting to Marty's comment, very good point regarding urban versus rural. And I think one of the clearest ways to demonstrate that the rural drivers actually benefit with the VMT program is to take a calculation of, say, they drive 50,000 miles annually. And Under the VMT program, with a penny and a half per mile, they're paying X. Right now, with their less fuel-efficient cars, when they fill up at the gas pump, for those 50,000 miles, they would have to fill up, X, if they get X number of miles per the gallon, you can figure out the gas tax, and then you can figure out the amount that they would pay for that 50,000 miles per the state in, federal gas tax versus the VMT. And then you see a very clear calculation that really under the VMT program, they're the winners. So just something as simple as that, comparing the two, I think is a real clear indication that they have nothing to fear. So when you talk about the state and the legislators not really wanting to implement something, I think it's going to get to a crisis point, because in the state of California, the gas tax revenues are dropping so dramatically that that's why the governor pushed up the implementation of our pilot program. And so with the last set of funding through the STIP program, the state of California is reducing, based on the reduction in the gas tax revenue, they are reducing to the counties, and then what will trickle down to all the agencies, about $754 million of funding. So what that means just for my county of Orange County, we're going to be losing $36.5 million. And it's the first time we're not only having to put projects on hold, we're actually having to cut out projects simply because this is such a dramatic reduction in our funding from the state level. So you can place your bets that a number of the local elected officials, along with county officials, we're going to be hammering up there at the state level for everyone to do the right thing and look at a serious program that will replace the gas tax. So recently I've had the pleasure of participating in a couple of different conferences. So on Monday, I was in Washington, D.C., along with Chairman Medaffer and CEO of the toll roads, Mike Cramen, and along with Amy Potter, our CFO. And we were on some panel discussions. And I think this was really interesting with all of the presentations, because the tolling industry, they weren't really aware of road usage charge, VMT, how does it really impact them. And by the end of the conference, they were just laser focused, and they said, oh my gosh, now we've really got to keep track of what's happening in the state of California with this pilot program, because with federal interoperability, this will roll out to all the other states eventually. And they understand the nexus now between road usage charge and the major implications for the tolling industry. So they're on board to really stay engaged and focused with us at this point. And then I think it was on Wednesday or Thursday, Carrie, which day was it? This week has gone by so quickly. Wednesday. Carrie and I spoke at WTS Orange County, and great discussion as well. And I think that all of the organizations that we go in front of to speak about the road usage charge and the pilot program, people now are getting engaged, and they understand that we truly have to find a replacement. A number of folks said, well, just increase the gas tax. But once you explain that delta with people getting more fuel-efficient cars and people getting natural gas cars and all-electric vehicles, that delta of people paying little or nothing for gas tax is growing, and the amount of the gas tax revenues are shrinking. So we do have to do something for the long term. All of the major organizations in Southern California are fully on board to getting the word out. SCAG, OCTA, TCA, OCTA. So we're getting the word out to as many people as we can to sign up for the road charge pilot program. We've got a little under 5,000 people signed up, but in order to make sure that we fill all of the categorical slots, we really need double that amount of people to sign up. And we need more people from Southern California to be part of the program so that their voices will be heard when this program goes into effect. Let's see. Oh, one interesting comment that was made by I think it might have been at the IBTTA conference, and Jim responded to it. Someone from the audience said, well, the easiest thing to do for the future when this program needs to go into effect, why don't you just get AAA to figure everything out? And Jim said, well, we've got the person from AAA on our panel here, so on the CTC tax. So we're going to just turn it over to Steve, and he's just going to have to implement everything from the federal interoperability standpoint. So, those are my comments so far. Thanks.
We do know that AAA has a little bit of sway, and yes, I did invoke your name, Steve. But we also know that AAA is very mindful, and they study things very carefully before they jump into something.
We do indeed. And on that point, if I'm assuming
Please.
this has moved on to me, it's funny, a few weeks ago, or maybe a month or so ago, I had one of our automotive folks in our automotive department contact me about this because we've had internal communication on the pilot, and we offer a plug-in device for some different uses, and we're going to have some different devices in the future, whether it's for insurance or automotive services or other things. And he says, well, I want to make sure that if this thing happens, that we would have an opportunity to have an option for people to choose our device as well. So they're thinking about that issue as well. Let me touch on a couple of things, and I appreciate the chair's sort of suggestion with this maybe somewhat smaller group and a little bit of open time that we have today to comment on a few things. One of the things I wanted to touch on is we did do an article, and I mentioned this previously in our magazine, that came out right around the holidays, and I understood that there was a bit of a bump up in volunteers as a result of that, with the magazine going out to half of all households. So that was very good. In a response to that, we did get some member letters. I would put them in the skeptical category, and they raised questions about two issues primarily. They were about privacy, some of them, and all of them, I think, touched on this lack of trust and the belief that this is just another way to get money out of my pocket. So, whether, it can be debated how much taxes are and how well the money is being used. Those are worthwhile debates, but I think from much of the public, there is a skepticism there that we need to be mindful of, and we need to take into consideration as we move forward. And by the way, we do respond to every single communication we get from a member, and some of these responses then became conversations for a while, and I think I actually got a few more volunteers out of the process. And FYI on that. Also, just one other note from the Auto Club, and then I'll touch on a few broader issues. Our CEO wanted to make sure that we're participating in this process fully, so we did extra internal communications encouraging our employees to volunteer. We're also, and if it hasn't happened yet, it's going to happen imminently, are going to be signing up as a fleet volunteer, maybe taking about 25 of our claims vehicles to volunteer and participate on that basis. So we're all into the learning. We're all into the study of it. A couple other larger issues that I wanted to touch on, some of which came up a little bit here. I think for this to be successful, the cost, and we've talked about some of these issues before, but the cost is going to have to be low or reasonable. I think that at some point, in addition to low cost, the ease of use, it's going to have to be simple. So I think the technology aspects over in the future are going to be really critical to the success of this. Then there are larger policy issues that, although our committee is not charged with dealing with, are going to have to be dealt with, and will either pave the way to successful implementation or may pose some significant roadblocks. And those include how the money is going to be used. It includes the rate that's going to be charged, and it includes some of the larger policy issues as people push and shove to, whether it's a local option of a road charge, which I do think would, even if administratively in some back office computer it could be simplified. I think the idea of variable rates from jurisdiction to jurisdiction is going to pose a political problem. I also think that charging different cars, different rates, or different rates based on your fuel or any other attribute, or even time of day or location of travel, those are all worthy policy discussions to think about. But I think that it will sink this effort if it gets attached to this, at least in the near term. A couple other quick points. One is on timing, and maybe getting to Lauren's comment a little bit about whether the administration has this as a high enough priority or not. I almost had the flip side concern, and that was the impression that I have is the administration wanting to push up the timing, and I'm concerned that there could be an effort to go for legislation for implementation premature. Ahead of a lot of these issues being addressed, and I'm concerned about it for this reason, that I think it could result in blowback and negative response to it that could set the effort back further. So I just think we have to be cautious as we move forward and do things at the right time. And then one side note on this equity discussion and the rural-urban issue is, the flip side of that is, okay, great, Prius drivers like me are going to pay more. Well, wait till the environmentalists get a hold of this. And they're not going to be so pleased about that either. So I think it may be a double-edged sword with that. And then the last note I wanted to say is that there was a joint hearing, information hearing of the Senate Judiciary and Senate Transportation Committees this Tuesday of this week on vehicle data issues. It was very well attended. 12 legislators were there for the bulk of the meeting. Automakers, consumer groups, AAA, and a lot of others presented and discussed these issues. And it was interesting that this effort came up in a question from Senator Moorlach, actually, indicating that car data is an integral part of this issue as well. So it is on the radar screen of a lot of people, and I think it's tied to the ease of use and getting information out of cars. So I'll leave it at that, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely, and thank you all members of the committee, and I'm going to offer a few observations as well and perhaps jump on a couple of things that have been said. The pilot that we're in, and when Brady gives his report, he'll give an update, and we're actually doing pretty good on signups. Where I've been, and many of you are aware of this over the time, has been we're studying something based on what we know today, and that's what this pilot that we design, and it gives a number of choices. And I think once you explain to folks that there's choices involved, from privacy at one end to high tech at the other, there's a lot greater acceptance. But just this, in the past 3 months of this year, as we're 2.5 months into the year, I've been to DC 3 different times for this particular issue. We were at TRB in January at the Transportation Research Board. We talked about it there, and a lot of interest nationally on this topic. Then in February at the Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance group discussion, quite an active panel discussion there on issues that are going on in California. In that case, we had a panel just on the California pilot. Malcolm Doherty was there, myself, a number of folks from California that were commenting on where we are with the pilot. And then probably the most intriguing panel was the one that we were just at on Monday this week. It's amazing. It's been a long week.
I know.
Where at the Tolling Association, what do they stand for? International Bridge Turnpike Tunnel Association or something like that. But there was a panel that included everything from the Reason Foundation on one end to what's her name from the Minetta? Hillary. Hillary Nixon. Yeah, was there. And it was interesting. Alex Hergott, the committee consultant for the Senate EPW committee, who basically had no holds barred. He basically said, this is the gas tax will never be raised federally. It's just never going to happen. We're going to move, as he said, from 80%, 20% to the states to eventually 50-50, and eventually the feds are hardly going to give any money at all because it's just not sustainable long term, which means it's going to have to come back to the states to collect money. And he says the only really way you're going to be able to do that is through some sort of a per user fee basis. And it was interesting hearing that perspective. Obviously, he's coming out of one camp of perspective, but nonetheless, they're the ones that are making the decisions right now. I was pretty blunt and effectively was reacting in many respects to some of the misgivings in the public perception that's out there. And I want to refer to something that's on a website. Lucy Dunn, who is here in Orange County, who is just the past chair of the California Transportation Commission, also the CEO of the Orange County Business Council. You wouldn't expect somebody with those stripes, if you will, to be strongly behind something like this mileage-based user fee, but she's gotten past the rhetoric. She's gotten to the reality. She's seen transportation funding, as many of us have, on a state level, and recognizes that the gasoline tax is not sustainable for the long term as a funding source. So in Fox and Hounds, and I believe it got published in the Orange County Register, one of Ms. Bartlett's colleagues, Michelle Steele, published what I will just say, and I'm realizes the public discussion was probably one of the more ignorant commentaries I've read in a long time, because it talks about Sacramento should stop taxing, stop a new tax on driving, leading by, do you want the government following your car every day? Hardworking Californians to want a new tax on driving. Basically rip this program that it's only convinced 570 California drivers to sign up. There was just so much misinformation in this thing. Its proponents of this tax claim it will replace the existing tax on gas, but when was the last time you heard government eliminating a revenue source? A similar pilot in Oregon requires drivers to pay taxes on top of their existing gas tax. Everything that was in here was so wrong, and I have no problem saying it. It says the irony is that government wants to get Californians to drive less, but at the same time they want to tax us on how much we drive. And it goes on, and there's a few other things in here that are wrong. But the one thing I did agree, where it talks about hardworking, long-driving Californians can't trust Sacramento with what they do with their tax dollars. And until we can, she urges this thing to get parked. And I think the biggest thing that I see as an impediment is to all of this is that the dollars collected for transportation don't always go back to transportation. And so the credibility issue is a real one. And I think that perhaps is the biggest thing that will be the impediment to this actually getting fixed. I've got to add on, since I mentioned Ms. Steele's comments, Lucy Dunn had a wonderful response that said, Michelle's entitled to her own opinion, but not to her own facts. And went on, and there's comments, and you can find this at foxandhoundsdaily.com if you want to read any more on it. But it was quite amazing, all the comments. My comments, I added on something the other day, and I said the gas tax is dead. It's not a sustainable funding source for transportation. Even if every dollar collected today went to transportation, it wouldn't come close to the $300 billion we need in California to fund our transportation infrastructure improvements. So you could get rid of Caltrans tomorrow. You could take every dollar collected. You still wouldn't have enough money. And obviously you can't get rid of Caltrans because somebody's got to build the stuff. So the reality is you've got to recognize the fact that the gas tax is just not a sustainable funding source for transportation. So I just want to mention those few observations. And as Marty, you said something I wrote down, and it's only a good professor could say these kind of things, but trying to find a different architecture for sustainable transportation funding. And that's really what this is. We're trying to find a different architecture to have transportation funded sustainably in the future. And that's a fascinating and a very good way of putting it. But again, I think the biggest impediment is public understanding and awareness. Just a couple other things.
I had something.
Oh, go ahead.
Members, I just wanted to add, I wanted to follow up on Supervisor Bartlett's comment regarding the STIP. And I think it's important to point out that in May, at the May Commission meeting, that's where the Commission will be adopting the revised, the 2016 STIP, State Transportation Improvement Program, 2016. And
Seems like 20,000.
I'm sorry, yeah, 2016. That is, this STIP adoption will be very painful for the Commission. We will be deleting $754 million worth of projects from the State Transportation Improvement Program that were previously we had committed funding to in the 2014 STIP. We will also be delaying projects. More than 200 projects are affected by the Commission's action that will take place in May. And so we imagine that there will be significant press with respect to the Commission's action. And I just wanted to make sure that you're all aware that will be happening in May. We will be, as Commission staff and commissioners, working with the press, but also in your efforts. This is an opportunity to talk about what's happening with the gas tax and how it's an obsolete mechanism, and what we're doing as a state to move something forward as far as the long-term solution that we have this opportunity before us. So wanted to mention that.
No, and thank you for adding that on. I mean, that's the reality that we're facing, is that who wants to cut $750 million from transportation funding? But it's being cut because the gas tax doesn't work. And that's the reality. The last thing I wanted to mention, just in this kind of open dialogue, is something that I wanted to bring the TAC members aware of, and I've talked with Norma Ortega about it and folks in the governor's office. This pilot that we're on right now, which will start in earnest in July, and I feel quite confident we'll have 5,000 volunteers, is going to test pursuant to what we adopted in December. But as many of you know, I've talked long and hard about technology, and a couple of things that we heard at actually the Mileage-Based User Fee Conference in February was a fascinating presentation. Just as we heard that, remember the kid that showed up at Tahoe that had this using telematics and accessing telematics, and how fascinating that was. And I believe he's one of the respondents that got selected. Is that correct, Norma? His company got selected, which is great. But
What is his company name?
what's his company name? Smart Car? Smart Car? Yeah, his company's called Smart Car. And they were the folks that have the license already with a number of the auto manufacturers to access telematic data that's in the vehicles. But one thing that was a big takeaway for me at the Mileage-Based User Fee Conference was the following. There's 240 million cars on the road in the United States. And the model that we're looking at right now, in large part, requires an account for each of those drivers, each of those vehicles. Park that thought for a minute. 1 in 6 don't even have insurance. So we're already missing out on 1 in 6 drivers aren't even paying for insurance on our roads today. So it's going to be pretty hard to get 240 million people to sign up to pay for this thing. And we knew that all along. And we also heard about the cost to collect. So then you contrast that to the other side, where, the mileage or the gas tax today is collected at the rack. It's paid for at the wholesale level. When the trucks pull up to get the big tanker trucks, get the gas to deliver it to the stations. 812 payers nationwide, just 812. So the cost to collect is a lot less. And out of that 812, I think they said less than 20 were the bulk of the revenues coming in. So you contrast that with the fact that there's about 120,000 gas stations in the United States, just 120,000. And then this concept that was thrown at us, and it was one of the panels, and it was just a takeaway for me, and I thought, this is something worth studying along with more telematics. But here was a device they talked about putting into each vehicle, just like California mandated the OBT2 port, 25 years ago, 30 years ago. What if there was a device in the vehicle that just as soon as you pulled up to the pump, it transmitted the data since the last time that vehicle gassed up, just the number of miles driven. For privacy folks, it's not like where they drove or, where they were at, but it's just the miles driven. And it gets reflected on the price that you pay in the pump. So instead of, you're not paying the gas tax if you have that device, you're paying just for the miles you drove. So it takes care of any of this credit rebate stuff where they are doing it in Oregon. You just, you've got that device, there's your charge for the miles you drove. And that information goes through the gas pump, goes out through the retailer's normal system to pay, whether they already pay for sales tax and everything else.
And may I add that also assists in the long-term transition, because for some time there'll be vehicles on the road which don't have that technology. They continue to pay the gas tax.
Exactly the point, Marty. And so it was fascinating for me to hear this. And so I thought, what, that could be one of many answers beyond the telematics piece. So when Will Kempton and Norma and I were in D.C. in January, and we met with senior officials at the Department of Transportation, they let us know that the FAST Act rules will be coming out here probably in the next couple of weeks. And with that coming along, maybe, just maybe, it might make sense that we, as the state, whether through Caltrans or through the commission, and clearly the governor's office would have to support this, that we would perhaps be in a situation where we would apply for a second pilot that might look and just laser focus that kind of an activity, just to see how that might work. And then talking with the folks, Samuel Johnson, for example, at the conference on Monday, that perhaps an organization like TCA could participate and help us, because they've already got the infrastructure in place to where maybe, in a given geographic area, we'd be able to do something like that. So again, I'm just throwing out ideas. That was the purpose of this roundtable discussion on item 4 on the agenda. But I think that the possibilities exist that we could, in fact, see some advancements that we've learned so much in this process that maybe we can learn even more as we continue and try to address the issues in the Michelle Steeles of the world that, they are all entitled to their opinions, but again, we need to make sure we're giving them the facts so they can recognize the facts that are out there that goodness gracious, we need to find a way to sustainably fund transportation. Norma, I want to turn it to you and then perhaps to Susan again as part of this item, if there's any things you want to add on.
Well, actually, we are looking at that particular option as a possibility for a Fast Act pilot. We're meeting with several other state agencies and Department of Finance to further kind of look at a possibility of submitting for that proposal. Today, you're going to hear a lot from my folks and our consultants on the work that has been done since the report was issued by the TAC, the recommendations came out. We are doing extremely well on the volunteer front. There's a lot of information going out to folks that have volunteered are hearing back from us, and we're going to keep that interest going forward. I do want to say that after every conference or article that comes out, we are seeing an increase in volunteers, so I really appreciate all the work that the TAC members have done in doing outreach. We have selected vendors to help us with the actual testing of the 5 different methods. So I'm very encouraged that there's a lot going on and we will be ready July 1. One issue that we have of concern, obviously, is that we may not be able to hit the matrix. So our next point is to try and do some focused recruiting. Rural drivers have not volunteered, for a number of reasons, but we are asking the Rural County Task Force and others to help us in recruiting. And we're trying to get a better sense of where some of these folks are. Are there certain areas we can go? And we did oversample, I believe, for rural drivers. So there's a lot of great stuff that's going on. We will launch July 1. We also have established an executive steering committee with the CTC executive director, the undersecretary of CALSTA, and myself to make sure that we can address issues as they come forward and make some decisions and move ahead with the pilot. I do, to Lauren's point, the issue of the administration kind of stepping forward. I've had some conversations with the governor's office and also with agency, and I think this first year they were a little, standing back and letting the TAC move forward with their work. I think you'll be seeing more engagement as we move forward with the pilot. I know there's a lot of interest in what we're doing in California. We're one of 14 states of the Western Road User Charge Consortium, and we are looking at also doing potentially a regional pilot with several states moving forward probably for the second year of the FAST Act funding. So there's a lot of activity going on, and you're going to get some great information today from Carrie and Brady, Mitch, and our consultants.
And Norma, just a quick comment on the increased engagement. Not sure what form that's going to take, but I think education is the key. And whether that's education to policymakers and legislators, or maybe as we tiptoe further on this thing, is some information to the public beyond what's already been done, because I think that's the key in this.
I spoke to the new motor vehicle board yesterday in Sacramento, and there's a number of dealers, and they had some questions. I mean, I was, I guess, a little surprised at how the lack of understanding of how transportation is funded. One gentleman said, well, there's a lot of funds that are collected when people cross the Golden Gate Bridge. Why don't you use that to fund transportation? Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of misconceptions, and I agree we need to figure out how to simplify that and be able to share that with policymakers as well as with the general public.
And just one last point on that, and I know this message sometimes it's a dual message, and sometimes they can get mixed or confused. But the architecture question is one issue. The amount of money and the need is another issue. And sometimes they get combined, which may be legitimate, but it also just raises up the spectrum. Oh, this is just a tax increase. So I think that needs to be done very carefully.
Good point. Lisa?
Okay. And I agree. The only point in Supervisor Steele's press release that was a little bit factual was the fact that we don't trust Sacramento. There's a lot of distrust. And Eric knows firsthand with the truck weight fees. They were supposed to be used for transportation, and they siphoned off all those fees to use for other things. So that's why there's, amongst other things, there's a huge distrust of Sacramento. But when you talk about pricing, and this is something we'll have to think about, because some of the methods, for instance, congestion pricing, when you talk about the manual methods, the time permit, the mileage permit, the odometer readings, congestion pricing just doesn't work. We have no ability to implement something like that. It adds another layer of complexity, and I don't think we even want to go there. Now, on the flip side, when you talk about the administrative fee for the manual methods for data collection are dramatically higher than those that are technology-based. So, for instance, on the toll road agency here, if you've got a transponder in your car and it's billed automatically every month to your credit card, you have if you don't meet the minimum $25 per month, there's a $2 admin fee. But the cost on the toll every time you go through a toll booth is X. Now, if you just go through the toll booth and you don't have an account and you just pay on a one-time toll basis, you've got 5 days to pay. Well, for the same vehicle going through the toll booth at the same time of day, you pay X. If you've got an account, you pay X plus, which is a higher amount if you've got just the one-time toll that you want to pay, because there's that admin fee that has to be calculated into the equation. So we have to consider when we work through the pilot program and then perhaps an actual implementation of a program long-term, do we then have one fee that's charged for all drivers regardless of data collection, which means you've got the technology-based users supplementing the cost of the manual users. And then you've got people that are concerned about privacy, so they want to be on a more manual basis. Well, at TCA here, there's a higher fee that's paid. So there's that balance that has to be struck. But you want to encourage people to get off those manual data collection methods anyway. So if you charge a higher admin fee associated with that group, that will encourage those folks, just like we do on the toll road, switch from one-time fee over to a transponder and get an account with us, and then pay a lower fee. So we've got a number of folks that are coming over every single month because they realize, oh my gosh, I paid $6 and my next door neighbor went through the same time I did and he only paid $5. So they start looking at the numbers, and it'll encourage people. We have to have a basis for encouraging folks to get off the manual methods, because I can tell you, when you fill up at the pump, the admin fee is about 1%. Well, under the manual data collection method for the pilot program, the admin fee is going to be horrendous. You're going to have people that you're not going to be able to track down. You're going to have to, it's just going to be a lot higher than obviously a pay at the pump method or just something that's technology based. So just something we have to think about for the future.
Excellent comments. Thank you. Pam?
I just want to make one comment about language used. And what we're talking about is that we need to find language to say that we want to ensure that transportation dollars raised go to transportation uses. The more and more we say things like we don't trust Sacramento, I think the regular person, they might hear Sacramento, but they might not quite remember Sacramento. They might say they don't trust government. They don't trust Orange County government. They don't trust the city of Orange government. So again, I think we have to be careful not to bash government, to make statements about what we think government should be doing. But if we keep attacking and eroding governments by saying we don't trust a particular branch of government, we're feeding into what is really, I think, a national situation where there's been a loss of credibility of government. And most of us here are representing government, working hard, staff at government jobs to do what's good for the public. So I just think we should be careful about how we use that and find the language again. We want to ensure that transportation dollars raised go to transportation needs.
Good point. At this point, I want to recognize Susan Branson now for a few comments. But before I do, just to let you all know, the California Transportation Commission on Wednesday appointed Susan as its next executive director, starting April 1st. Will Kempton, as you know, came to the CTC as a retired annuitant, which means he was able to work, for like a year, and we were hoping to keep him for 2 years, but PERS, in their infinite wisdom, didn't want him to keep working for 2 years. They said, sorry, you have to leave after just 1 year. And so as a result, we needed to replace him, and so Susan was selected. And so with that, Susan has a few comments as well.
Well, I'm very honored and touched by the Commission's faith in me, and just want to let you all know that Will Kempton is a wonderful mentor, and following in his footsteps is very, very difficult. And I also want to let you know today that Director Kempton wasn't able to come today. He is actually at the American Society of Civil Engineers speaking to 300 engineers about transportation funding and the road charge. He has 2 separate presentations. And so he would be here if he could, but this is his, we're really actively at the Commission working to get the word out as well. And what I wanted to share with you today just is that we are planning a tri-state commission meeting with Oregon and Washington in June. And we've put on that agenda a presentation on the road charge efforts in California. Oregon and Washington will also be sharing what they're doing as far as their road charge efforts. And we're hoping for a very robust discussion on, the cross-state issues and, what they are working on and how we can work together further. And our speaker for that, the California presentation, is Norma Ortega. So with that, Mr. Chair, that concludes my comments.
All right. Well, then, there's been item 4 with the committee member reports, very robust. Thank you very much for your input and sharing perspectives. Let's move on to item 5 on the agenda, and we'll call on Mitch Weiss to give us that report.
Ann Mayer was unable to make it, so I will be presenting this item for her.
You on the air? Oh, you are. Okay.
I can get closer.
There you go.
Or louder, or both. The Road Charge Work Group met via teleconference on March 4th to discuss items on today's Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee meeting agenda. There were 3 things that came out of it. First, the work group members expressed concern about the challenge we're having recruiting volunteers from the rural areas. So they reaffirmed their willingness to help, and we've worked with them on that. We did some follow-up with the Rural Counties Task Force and the Rural County Representatives of California. Sharon Scherzinger in particular reached out to some people, and I know a couple of interviews came out of that with the press, so hopefully we're getting the word out in rural areas. And with that, I'll conclude the presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mitch. Why don't we jump right back over to Mitch and Brady on item 6 on the agenda. We'll start with you, Brady. He's got some breaking news for us on our numbers.
Okay, so the fun part of the meeting. Good morning, Chairman Daffer, committee members. We've had a lot of work that's been going on since our December meeting, since the report's gone out. I have a lot of information to kind of get through today in a short amount of time. So I do want to offer up, if you have questions as I'm going, just kind of prompt me and we can take the questions through the presentation. But you will see that the websites continue to steadily generate tons of interest in the state, nationally, and around the world. And you might also see a couple ironies throughout the presentation, so I'll try to point those out. All right, website statistics. Just like last year, I wanted to provide you with the most up-to-date information. So it's ironic that on the day we meet in 2016, and we actually eclipsed the 5,000 participant mark. So that happened this morning. Now we have a long way to go. We have to meet demographic and
Somebody send a
socioeconomic.
memo to Michelle Steele to let her know that we aren't just at 517 or 300, whatever it is.
And so that happened today. These numbers were actually as of March 15th. So I don't have, the rest of the presentation isn't based off of the 5,000 today. It's based off of these numbers that you have in front of you. But we've had about a little over 450 interest list signups to date. And we've also had tons of traffic going through the website since January 5th when it launched. The volunteer characteristics, we have our new oldest car is actually a 1953 model car. So we have a range of 1953 to actually 2016. And the split of the volunteers right now in terms of north, central, and south within the state, it's 44% north, 12% central, and 47% south. So I thought that would be an item that you would be interested in. You'll probably recognize this chart. So I'm going to hit on it very briefly because Travis has a lot more information in his presentation, but just a quick rundown of what's going on in the chart is the numerator, and you'll see two numbers in each of the boxes. There's a numerator and a denominator. The denominator is the TAC recommended target, and the numerator is the number of volunteers in each of those categories. I'm just going to remind you that the upper left quadrant is light-duty commercial vehicles. The upper right quadrant, the red quadrant, is commercial trucks. Yes, the number's staggeringly high. Lower left quadrant is private passenger cars. And the lower right quadrant includes agency vehicles, vehicles registered on tribal lands, and out-of-state vehicles.
Interrupt?
Yep.
Your invitation. What did you say the north, central, south split was?
It was 41% north, 12% central, and 47% south.
41, 12, 47, and then what's the target?
Let's see.
Did you already do the math? I'm looking at 6 numbers, but I couldn't do the math. Okay.
I think it was about 50% south, but it's in your presentation, I believe. Yeah.
Travis, maybe you could update us during your presentation. Rather than, it's about half south. And then what's the north?
30%. 30, 20, 50.
30, 20, 50. So so far we're oversampling north. That's
That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and so the top vehicles that are enrolled in the pilot program right now, this is another irony with Oregon's Origo program. Actually, the most amount of vehicles of any particular type is the Toyota Prius at 230. Next is the Honda Civic at 175. And finally, third is the Honda Accord at 165 vehicles enrolled to date. In terms of the top hybrid or electric vehicles, Toyota remains the winner, but we also have Chevrolet Volt and the Nissan Leaf. The Volt is about 51 Volts have signed up for the program, and about 40 Nissan Leafs. So here are your top 5 manufacturers. Toyota remains the top, followed by Honda, Ford, Chevrolet, and Nissan. And we have a total of 84 different manufacturers represented in the pilot thus far. So at previous meetings, I would actually come up and tell you the various locations by percentage in terms of California and who's visiting the site. Google Analytics does this for us now. As you can see, there's the top 10 cities that are frequently visiting the site, and all the bar at the bottom means is the darker the shade in terms of the bubble, the more visits there is in that region. But as you can see, the entire state, there has been traffic from all of California, and let's see, the top 10 cities actually make up over 50% of the site visits. In terms of kind of the techie stuff that I know Madaffer likes to hear is our bounce rate is actually really low. It's at 44.8%. The average number of pages a user is usually visiting is over 2, and the average session is a little over 2 minutes. Now, I also want to provide you with another map that shows that, well, we have a lot of interest within the United States about our program. In fact, there's only one state that hasn't visited the website, and maybe they're still recovering from the first state sales tax that was instituted in 1921. And across the world, we have quite a bit of interest as well. Any of the areas shaded in blue are countries that have visited the site. Let's see. Something interesting about those users, though, is 77% of the visitors are actually new visitors. 23% are returning. We also have an interesting stat about desktop versus mobile access. So 37% of people accessing the website are accessing it with their mobile phone or tablet. And the conversion rate, actually, the amount of people that are visiting the website that get turned into volunteers is approximately 20% right now. So 1 in 5 visitors that are actually visiting the site is being converted into a volunteer. A couple other updates. We have a brand new website. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you visit the site. It launched on January 5th of this year. It's a state-of-the-art website, and we're working with a really good team. The initial emphasis on the design of the website was on good information architecture, and you wouldn't notice that because you really only notice bad information architecture when you're viewing sites. But the structure and flow of the website was very strategic. It calls, there's certain points in the website where you really call to action if you're interested on the Road Charge Pilot program. It has a responsive design, meaning it's PC or mobile ready. There's very strategic breakpoints in between the information that's provided and the different visuals that kind of draw the user's eyes to the various portions of the website. They're very lifestyle-focused visuals that keep the visitor's attention and really visually tell the story in a very succinct way. And let's see, everyone, we need to remember that people remember 80% of what they see and do versus what they read and hear. So that's why we really tried to emphasize visuals on the website. In terms of there's some new forms on the website, and what you'll see is that we strategically designed these forms to avoid action paralysis. So I think that's why even today we have 5,000 volunteers signed up. We're asking for readily available information, which removes any barriers to completion. And let's see, our interest list is also positioned in a way that if somebody does not want to sign up as a volunteer, they can follow the project and remain involved with the Road Charge Pilot program. So here's our new expanded sign-up form. Last year, you saw we only asked for a limited number of fields, and part of the reason was we didn't want to scare away too many people as we just started to kick off this pilot program. But now we've added quite a few different fields. At the very top, you'll notice that anyone that wants to submit a fleet can actually submit information, which our team will reach out to them directly. Very easy, click on it, takes you to some other information. Then you'll also notice that there's a ton of other information, and this is to help fill out all the demographic and socioeconomic targets. These are things like age ranges, gender, household size. I thought one thing that the team was very thoughtful of is not having to make people fill in information. It's using all drop-down fields or API, and even for the county and the income, it calculates, if you put in your county, it knows where the median income is in that county, and it changes depending on which county that you're in. And so that's all done automatically. You'll also see ethnicity as well. Now, there's a ton of traditional marketing that's happened since December. In front of you, you have a DMV insert, which was launched in February 22nd of this year. We partnered with the DMV to help get the word out. These flyers are going out in all registration sticker mail-outs. Probably for the next 2 months, we had about 2 million inserts in total, and it won't be going out in registration billing, so it's actually with the tags themselves. And a big thank you to DMV for doing that, partnering up with us. We've also had some other traditional marketing, like letters that have gone out to California's U.S. Congressional delegates. We've also had a huge letter mail out that went to all MPOs and RTPAs, executive directors, and notifying them of the program as well. We've done a couple press releases. January 15th, Caltrans released a press release asking for volunteers needed for the pilot program. And on March 10th, we released a press release on the 4 firms that you'll hear more about in Travis's presentation. But these are the account managers that are going to be helping us in the pilot program. Aside from the tons of speaking engagements that each of you and all of us have done, we also reached out to our transportation partners who have been very gracious to help us get the word out in terms of the road charge. And some of those organizations include Self-Help Counties Coalition, League of California Cities, California State Association of Counties, the California Trucking Association, AAA, our California Chamber of Commerce, California Council of Governments, WTS, Rural Counties Task Force, and even here locally, the Orange County Business Council. So a big thank you, and if I didn't name you specifically, there's been a lot of agencies that have stepped up to the plate. So now I'm going to move on to the digital marketing side of things, and this is interesting because we have a team that they're just very involved in what they do. They're highly targeted and effective digital advertising campaign. What you're going to see beginning this month is various social media platforms are going to be tapped for increased exposure of the road charge pilot program. We have 2 different companies that we're working with, Ad3, doing digital ad serving and testing. We have Creative Empowerment, that's really bringing the creative development and Facebook community management that we'll talk about to life. And so in terms of creative direction and branding, we've been working together, the team's been working together to develop a brand for the pilot. The DMV flyer is a great example, and that really launched the initial style and design of the brand. From there, we've worked with the team to do a creative build-out of about 15 or so usable Facebook ads that will be pushed out this month. We've also developed a public service announcement by animating the DMV flyer, and I actually have that in my presentation, so we'll see that next. We also have targeted and advertising strategies working right now. We developed a tracking and targeting system so that we can track all of the different signups versus the matrix that, as you saw earlier. We're constantly measuring these signups against the TAC recommended targets, and we will be optimizing advertising in certain target markets, primarily to get folks that are in rural communities, or if we have an imbalance in gender or any of the areas that we're trying to meet targets, we will have targeted marketing, and most likely will be happening through digital marketing. We have an active community management plan in place. We will have Road Charge will have its own Facebook page that will help create this active community that can continue to follow the project, even if you didn't get signed up as a potential volunteer for the pilot. And so what we've developed is internal processes to respond to questions and comments as they come into social media. It's going to be in real time. It's not going to take 7 days to respond to somebody. It's going to take hopefully minutes or hours. And the Facebook community management is intended to launch sometime next week. As well as things like just people going on to Google and searching for the pilot program. We've optimized through search engine optimization and analytics to help boost up our search engine rating in terms of when you search for road charge and where our website is placed on that list. And so we talked already a little bit about the public servants announcement, but why don't I play it? And it has no sound because it's going to be played at all the DMV or already has been playing in all of the Department of Motor Vehicles field offices. And that's statewide. And we'll also be putting a version of the video, which will have sound and music and things like that, on our social media websites, as well as headquarters, Caltrans headquarters social media websites. And frankly, anyone that would like to run that video, I think on any of your partner websites, we can do that as well. So
Brady, before you start it, can you hit pause? Or can you talk about the volunteer newsletter? Because that was a lesson learned from Oregon where they didn't engage the volunteers for a long time, so.
Absolutely. So we have our volunteer newsletter. That was going to be next, but we'll pull that up first. And and so our first newsletter went out on March 2nd. We periodically tried to reach out to everyone that's volunteered or shown interest in the project, but this one was our first more formal newsletter. And what the information that you saw if you received this newsletter is the new website update. We were asking folks that originally signed up that didn't give all of the other demographic and socioeconomic information to go back in and update your profile. They had a link to the TAC pilot design recommendations report. There was a list of important dates, different recruitment goals. There was a small section on what's going on at the federal level with the FAST Act, and a volunteer spotlight. And so that's what you see in front of you today. We are already working on our second newsletter, which is in development, and we plan on hitting on some different areas or categories like volunteer stats that I'm giving you today, social media, including the Facebook community, the public service announcement, a link to that, so all of our participants and potential participants can view the video, vendors and mileage reporting options, transportation funding education portion of the newsletter, and possibly a transportation fund type of quiz. So I do want to say if the TAC has any ideas or suggested topics for future newsletters, just let CTC staff know or myself, and we can definitely incorporate some other categories. So.
And Brady, if I could just add, I mean, I think it was great to do this newsletter. I think it's good to keep the connection and the engagement. I think it's very important. I thought it was well done, and I think it's a great idea to get input for other ideas.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
We had heard from some folks, hey, we signed up, early on, and we have not heard much of what's happening. So it did take us a little while to get it up and running, but I want to keep their interest.
Yeah.
I loved it, and I got to tell you, when I saw this, I thought, shoot, I've got to go back and sign up again. I signed up in the beginning, and all I think they had was my email address, so I've got to do that.
And I would also add, one of the members who I had some dialogue with had some specific questions that I wasn't able to find easily on the website, but I had remembered seeing it in the newsletter, so I forwarded my newsletter to that member.
And you're gonna get to update the website and add Susan as the CTC.
That's right.
That's
So
right.
we'll have a woman there now.
There you go.
We will also be reaching out to any of the potential participants that have given information but didn't update their profile. We're going to reach back out to those folks again and ask them to go and update their profile. That should be happening, I believe, next week.
And there's a direct link. It's an email that'll come out, and there's a direct link that you click on, and it takes you right into the information that you already provided. So you don't have to refill out the whole volunteer form.
So, with no further ado,
Did you want to say something? Okay.
I'm going to play the video for you. And these are, again, running at all DMV offices. It's the flyer that you see, but it's animated.
Very good.
So the video runs for a 30-second duration. We'll have a longer 40-second version with sound on our website. On average, if you're sitting in the DMV, it's going to run 6 to 8 times daily. And so depending on your appointment time, you may or may not see it. Let's see, it'll be, again, run on all of our website and social media platforms, including our Caltrans district office websites and social media platforms. And again, we can potentially run on any partner agency websites and social media as well. And last, but certainly not least, is our tentative schedule on what's going to happen over the next few months, especially since likely we won't see you guys until June. And so the targeted recruitment, if needed, is going to start next month. Our project team is going to start selecting participants in May, as well as notifying if you have been selected. The participants will have to go back in to the website or the enrollment area to select a reporting method, and then also enroll with the account manager in June. And July, we're going to be launching. So that's it today. I'm willing to field any other questions.
Any other questions for Brady? Professor?
Will people be notified if they're not selected as well as being notified if they are?
I think we very well can. Well, I think there's two things that we can do. We can definitely ask them to become a follower and on Facebook to continue to be a part of the project. But I think amongst the team, we absolutely can reach out. And
Perhaps with an explanation of the fact that we're being selective because we need people of certain characteristics, and thanking them very profusely because, again, this business of trust in government keeps coming up. And
I think that's an excellent idea. I expect we would weave that in.
I think, excuse me, I think it's a good idea as well. And also, given that there may be other elements or phases or other activities in the future that could use them or others, some, opening the door or allowing them to stay engaged for future opportunities.
Great point.
Good point. Mitch?
And one of the things we've asked is for Caltrans to look into what the incremental cost is of having more than 5,000 people included. If we get more people interested, and they are very interested, it's a shame to have to turn them away. If we're really taking a long-term look at this, the cost of having more people who learn about this on the front end might be very large compared to the long-term benefit.
That's a good point. Lauren?
A couple of questions. Just the animated video went by really quickly, but I thought I saw one slide that said something along the lines of, with more fuel-efficient automobiles, there's less money available for something or other. Is that the gist of it?
Essentially.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that's factually true, that there is less money of it, that if somebody challenges you, and people will challenge you on this sort of thing, that you can actually back up a statement that says there is less money available, because in some ways I've calculated there's less, in some ways there's more. So I just want to put that out there. My main question, though, is this whole presentation obviously is in the interest of populating the volunteer categories. And so I think it would be useful, certainly for me, but perhaps for the rest of the committee, to have some kind of a dashboard, because I couldn't find it in any of the materials we have right now, that actually takes the matrix, which was a very robust matrix. We spent a lot of time on it. I got it from Travis's presentation. We've got north, central, south. We've got urban, suburban, rural, agriculture, age, gender, income, ethnicity, and basically show us how we're doing on each of those cells. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Brady and I were just talking about this last night. I've asked Brady to pull the data on a weekly basis so that at the beginning of each week I can send out an email to all the TAC members, just letting them know where we're at and where we still need some work.
Okay, that's very responsive. Thank you.
Now, in looking at the matrix, it looks good, but the tough areas are, of course, rural and ag. And to your point, you're going to do some recruitment effort in that area. And I think it'd be interesting to see over the next 30 days how that recruitment effort works. That was probably the biggest takeaway for me, was when we were in the rural and ag areas. I remember specifically in Monterey and in Fresno, the concern that somehow or another it was going to end up costing them more in this road charge program. And to Lisa's point earlier, and I wrote that down also, which is a very good point, and it said, do the math. When you do the math, you figure out that really rural and ag, it's going to cost them less, more than likely, based on older vehicles and, lousy gas mileage.
But Jim, don't lose sight of, I have no idea how we're doing on the income stratification either, and that was a big deal.
Absolutely.
We spent a lot of time on that.
The justice piece of that was very important.
Yeah, and that's politically a very important part of it. So we just don't know if where we're at on that.
When we talk about the recruiting, and again, I think perhaps through Darius Assemi, who's one of our commissioners, who also happens to be involved in the agricultural industry, in the farming industry in the Fresno area. It might not be a bad idea to use Darius and some of his contacts to where you might be able to go to actually some of the local farm owners and others, literally at that granular level, where you're, to Lauren's point, are going to find an income diversity that is going to help fill some of those numbers that we're looking for.
We also want to do some working with different community groups and do some different language. There's a lot of Hispanics in the central area, Monterey and Fresno, and talking to certain folks to help us get the different demographics.
Good.
So that's going to be our big push for April.
Absolutely, and that's a good point you brought up, Norma. We actually are working on right now a Spanish landing page that'll be associated with the website. Not Google Translate Spanish, actually translated using Spanish translators. So
I have a question. The breakdown of the commercial trucks, which I'm
great job, Eric.
surprised that there's that many trucks that are in the pilot. Do you guys have a breakdown on vehicle size? Like, is this like smaller commercial vehicles, heavy duty commercial vehicles?
This is on.
Travis?
I can talk a little bit more about that in my presentation.
yeah,
but
sorry.
The bottom line is there's a reason that it's still red.
Oh, okay.
All right, we'll get to that.
Anxiously awaiting.
Anything else for Brady? Because if there's nothing else for Brady, item 7 on the agenda is Travis Dunn, and that's an update on the pilot preparation activities, which will explain the mysterious red.
All right.
Travis, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Daffer and committee members. Nice to be back. Really pleased to provide you all an update on how the project setup for the pilot is going, not only the recruiting aspects, but some of the technical aspects, the selection of account managers, and our attempts to fulfill all of the recommendations that you all made last year and issued in your final report in December. So does everyone have a screen? I can't tell if there's one here or if you could see the slides in front of you. Okay. The format for the presentation is to go through each of the 9 key recommendations from your report and give you a quick update on how we're doing with respect to these recommendations. So here they are listed. I won't read through them all. We'll go through them one by one. The first one is to simulate an open system design, and that was one of the early recommendations that you all made last spring. And we're fulfilling that basically by having specifying documents, a concept of operations, system requirements, and then an interface control document, which is a document that governs how the different pieces of, whether it's technology or manual mileage reporting, how those pieces talk to one another in order to generate an invoice for a participant to then simulate a payment on. So these documents are open, they're public, and anyone who has access to these documents theoretically could build a system to comply with and participate in the pilot. Of course, we had to select a limited number of firms in order to fulfill the pilot project because it's a limited number of participants. But the bottom line is that we're using open standards and open specifications. The second recommendation related to that was to provide choices for the participants in who manages their accounts, and to provide both commercial account managers and also the option for those who preferred a state agency or a simulated state agency to manage their account. So this was announced in a press release by Caltrans, I believe last week or 2 weeks ago. Our team has gotten significantly larger, not only with the public relations and creative firms that Brady mentioned to help us with the digital marketing, but also with the firms that you see here. So the commercial account managers are Azuga, IMS, and eRoad, and we also have a partner in Arvado Bertelsmann to help support the simulated state account management. And I would like to acknowledge, because they came all the way down, Nate Breyer from Azuga, and Gail Lavario from eRoad. They've been monitoring this process, I believe, ever since the beginning, and we're really thrilled to have a really great team helping us put this pilot together. Of course, they're working hard from the audience to make sure that we meet all our deadlines.
Early on, we discussed the possibility that the account managers might actually bring us some recruits through other lines of business that they have with citizens of California, and might encourage and be part of the recruitment. Is that feasible, given that these are the account managers that have been selected, do they have databases which they can use to participate also in the recruitment?
I believe some of them have offered to help, but our direction was to focus on general recruitment, at least for the initial wave. Is that right, Norma?
Yes, that's correct, because part of it is educating the general public in California, and we were using this as an opportunity to do that as well.
But it also seems possible to me that filling some of the gaps in our matrix
Right.
could possibly be done in a focused way
Right.
if they already have accounts with many people.
Okay.
That's all.
Great. Thank you. In addition to having choices in who manages your account for purposes of the pilot, there was also direction to have choices in how you report the mileage. We had several meetings where Matthew Dorfman presented a range of different approaches and technology and non-technology methods. And so each of the account managers is offering a number of methods. So Azuga is offering all 5 of the methods that you see here. OBD2 is, of course, the device that plugs into the vehicle to report mileage using the data coming out of the data port of the vehicle. So they're providing both a location-based and non-location-based plug-in device. 2 different methods of reporting with a smartphone, one of them without location information, and the mileage reporting technology is for that particular option is provided by a company called Vcon. And then another option provided by Driveway software, which provides location-based smartphone reporting. They're also working with a telematics provider that you referred to earlier, Chairman Daffer, Smart Car, to provide a telematics option for those customers who have a vehicle that is capable of using telematics. IMS, our second commercial account manager, is offering both of the OBD2 solutions as well as, again, the telematics option with Smart Car.
So both are going to be using Smart Car?
Right. So if you're a participant who would like to use telematics and your vehicle is ready to use telematics, has the capability, you'll have a choice between those 2.
I'm sorry, so is that wireless telematics?
Yes,
Or
it's-
not a plug-in?
No plug-in. It's reported directly from the vehicle to the account manager.
Oh, right, so no device at all?
No device.
Vehicle to system, period. Okay, got it.
Hands
Smart
free.
Car accesses the vehicle.
E-Road is our heavy truck partner, and they've also been working with Eric to help recruit, to your earlier question, Professor Wax. Both Azuga and E-Road are active in Oregon, for Azuga for the light vehicle pilot or volunteer program up there. And E-Road provides commercial services for a range of different compliance issues for trucks, including the weight mile tax in Oregon. So they're bringing some of their experience working on those issues to this program. The state account manager is going to provide the manual methods, and that's the time permit, the mileage permit, and the odometer charge. And there are several different ways that the odometer charge and mileage permit can be reported to the extent they need to be reported. We've partnered with Bureau of Automotive Repairs and specifically their partner, the Foundation for California Community Colleges. There's actually a network of individuals at the foundation at community colleges around the state who read odometers for the dispute refereeing. So they've offered and we've accepted and we've worked with them to help arrange a network of places you can go to get your official odometer reading for purposes of the pilot. Don't know how many folks will actually use that option, but we certainly wanted to make it available. And then also Vcon, the smartphone company. Vcon approach is interesting. It's actually a certified secure photo of your odometer. That's why it's not location-based. And so the way that you can report and enforce your mileage reading with the Vcon app is to download the app, take a photo of your odometer. It's much like depositing a check if you've done that with your smartphone, except it certifies the photo of the odometer as the basis for the mileage reporting. So those are the methods and the account managers. Everyone's very hard at work to get the systems up and running and everything working and making sure that we have as few snags as possible before the July 1st launch. And we're really, really pleased. We began the advertising process, if you will, to industry in early November with a forum that Chairman Daffer spoke at. We had over 30 firms attend that forum to learn more about this program. Shortly after that, in mid-November, we put out a request for proposals. We received 17 proposals from a variety of different firms with really interesting solutions, very strong pool of companies to choose from. We ended up selecting as many as we could accommodate for the project, and we're really pleased with the outcome. So thanks to Nate and Gail for being here today, and thanks to all of our partners for working with us to make this a success. Recommendation number 4 was to include out-of-state vehicles. This is an area where we need to do a little bit of focused recruiting. The green highlighted states are states from which we actually have some volunteers, and I swear the person from Louisiana is not me. It's actually true. There's only about 40 or so, 50 I think, out-of-state signups. It'd be nice to have some from neighboring states who might actually travel in.
Yeah, that was my
California from
question.
time
I
to
mean, for
time.
the non-neighboring states, they're not going to drive in California, presumably. So the value of the crossing the state line and tracking some and not tracking others.
It's less useful that way, that's right. So we're going to be, as part of our targeted recruitment that Brady mentioned coming up in April, we're going to be adding the out-of-state component to that as well.
Okay, so I don't get it.
Why would you sign up?
What is the person in Wisconsin getting, and what are we getting from the person in Wisconsin?
The person in
very-
Wisconsin's the DOT staffer who's been tasked with looking into this issue.
Oh, well, that may be okay, touche. But what's our interest in somebody from Wisconsin? That wasn't my picture when we were,
Yeah.
my vision when we did this.
I'll go out on a limb and say it's very unlikely we'll select that person to be in the pilot.
Okay.
We're probably only going to pick people
Okay,
from
you're saying
neighboring
states.
These are people who
who've signed up, not
Correct.
people that we're actively
Yeah.
anxious to incorporate into
That's
the
right.
program. We're more interested in
Oregon, Nevada, Arizona.
on the left side of the screen there. Okay, got
That's
it.
right.
Thank you.
Yeah. So,
And we've given the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to Canada on the map.
oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
I think we should fund transportation in California by taxing people in Wisconsin. I don't see anything wrong with this. It's a wonderful device.
Especially if they choose a manual method and pay for all miles, right?
And the Upper Peninsula has always wanted to secede from Michigan,
And join Wisconsin or become their own state.
become their own state.
To be serious, Ramon, it's possible that people whose vehicles are registered in Wisconsin are actually resident in California for some period of time, like they're students or something like that. So we should be careful that they may well be valid. Yeah.
This is a good point. I think because there's so few slots for out-of-state vehicles in the pilot, we're going to be able to take a closer look at them individually and make decisions on a, not necessarily a case-by-case basis, but certainly to consider that when we're making the selections. The 5th recommendation was to test interoperability with other states, and that's something that we're looking at doing in the back office and with a limited number of volunteers as well. So what will happen is some of the participants on their invoices, if you will actually see a billing for miles driven in both California and Oregon. And then the reconciliation will happen at the account management oversight level. I should have mentioned on the earlier slide, the account management oversight entity is sort of the catchment, if you will, for the mileage reports and funding reports that are coming in from the account managers. We have partners at Cambria Solutions that are helping us to build that and operate it. And one of the aspects of that part of the pilot is to reconcile this interoperability piece, at least on paper, to simulate how it might work if you were to have a multi-state road charge. And of course, in order to do that, certainly makes it more robust if we have some volunteers from Oregon. Number 6 was to include individuals, households, businesses, and at least one agency. So divide the screen into 2, individuals and households. Brady showed the sign-up form for those those categories. We've out of the 5,000, well, these numbers are a little bit out of date. So ballpark figures here. We've got about 4,000 of the 5,000 who've signed up are one individual, one vehicle. Another 900 or 1,000 or so have actually offered multiple vehicles from their household, in some cases 4 or 5. So if you actually add up all of those numbers, the number of vehicles who have volunteered for the pilot is well in excess of 6,000. The number of individuals or households is 5,000. And this was an important consideration, I believe, in your recommendations, that we have a certain minimum number of households that are participating in the pilot in addition to individuals. That way the households can experience what it's like to have multiple, potentially different types of mileage reporting methods in a single household. On the fleet side, we have 17 commercial fleets have volunteered and 5 agency fleets have volunteered. They have a separate sign-up form. 14 of the 17 commercial fleets are truck fleets, and then 3 of the 17 are light vehicle fleets, to your earlier question, Eric. So when we flip into the next slide on the matrix, which is a repeat of Brady's slide, I can quickly walk through the quadrants here. I'll start on the upper right with the trucks. So out of those 14 truck fleets who have expressed interest, the total number of power units in those 14 fleets is 945. That's why it's still red. We had some industry segmentation targets we wanted to meet as well. We don't have complete information from those 14 fleets, but we think we've got at least 6 or 7 out of the 10 industry segments that we can accommodate out of those 14 fleets, maybe more when we get more information.
In my earlier comments, for fleets, it would probably benefit them to provide multiple trucks. For one, they could take advantage of the free service, the administrative services. And so if you're just doing one truck and you have different routes, it's
not very useful.
yeah. So I that's what we're encouraging our folks that we talk to is, I kind of slipped my mind at first. I was just getting fleets, and then I circled back with the guys and said, yeah, you should probably dump in a few trucks into the pilot. So
good. Appreciate that, because we agree. Be ashamed to have a fleet of 150 trucks and they only put in one. Certainly, more is better. So if those fleets offer 5 or 10 vehicles within an industry segment, that makes our sample more robust. On the upper left quadrant, this is light commercial vehicles. We haven't done any direct outreach. I was very pleased to hear, Mr. Finnegan, that you'll be volunteering the AAA fleet.
Your 5 is going to go up to 30 real soon.
Excellent. Okay. We'll be looking for more opportunities to partner with businesses all over California. As you can see, we haven't really had a lot of interest. The North fleet, that's actually one fleet that's volunteered 130 vehicles as a light commercial fleet. We'll follow up with them and see how many of those vehicles they actually want in the pilot, and we're hoping to convert a few other commercial fleets from Northern California as well, so that it's not just one business.
Is it the city of Sacramento? They had indicated they were interested in.
No, it's I can't remember the name of the company at the moment, but it's a private fleet. So in the lower left quadrant, which is where the private vehicles, individuals, and households are reflected, this is where, and we haven't broken down the numbers by income yet, because we've just put out the call for people to go back and update their profiles, because we just started asking for that information. So once we get more completion of that, we got about 2/3, I believe, of the folks who signed up before March 1st, which is when the expanded form went live, approximately. We got about 2/3 of those folks to go back and update their information. So we think we have enough now to be able to break down the 6 numbers in the lower left quadrant by income. But if you look at it irrespective of income, urban areas, we've achieved all of the minimums. Rural areas, we're lagging. So both with our traditional recruitment, with your help, in speaking with community groups and stakeholders in rural areas, and also through our targeted digital advertising and recruiting campaign, we're hoping to target the rural areas in particular to get more signups. The other category is a catch-all for out-of-state drivers, agency fleets, and Native Americans living on tribal lands. This is another area where we have to do a little bit more detailed diagnostics of the signups to see who's from where. I believe we actually have quite a lot more than 52 if you count the agency fleets, but we haven't nailed down exactly who's interested in how many vehicles yet.
The whole city of Sacramento wants to sign up. I was contacted. I know that you've talked to them, Carrie, right?
So that's the status. We're actually really pleased that we just hit the 5,000 number today, and our digital marketing team is really excited about the digital marketing effort with the Facebook and social media advertising. They feel very confident that they're going to be able to blow the roof off of all of these numbers. and hit all the targets with some targeted advertising, which allows us to do it much more efficiently. Okay, yeah, the second slide here, and this gets to some of the more detailed demographic data that you were asking about earlier. So we show the age breakdown, ethnicity, gender, and income. Now these are the color-coded numbers in the first column. That's the percentage of current signups corresponding with each of those categories. And the target is on the right-hand column. So clearly we need more women sign up. We're overbalanced on the male side of the ledger. Low income or below median income signups are lagging, and Black and Hispanic on the ethnicity side are lagging as well.
But well within targets of where you're going to.
But on the income side, that's from a smaller sample, right? That's not
Correct.
You actually don't know.
This is of the, I guess, about 3,500 out of the 5,000 who provided that information.
Okay.
But
I'm sorry, and on the income, I had a question. Didn't we decide on 2 categories?
yes.
And you have 3 sort of representations
So the
there?
2 categories are applied to the north-south urban-rural matrix, and then the low category is across the board. So we wanted to have 25% across the board in the low-income category, and then the below and above median targets apply to each of those quadrants in the lower left part of the matrix. One point I'll make, even if these splits stay as they are, if we are able to recruit 10 or 15,000 individuals, we will do a targeted selection to make sure that the pool of volunteers meets the targets, which means that in the sorry we didn't select you letter, Professor Wax, that would be part of the explanation. Is we had targets to meet. We couldn't select everybody because we wanted to make sure that there was a fair representation of all of the state. So more signups is good, both because it gives us a bigger pool to choose from, but also with our targeted digital marketing campaign, we're going to specifically target some of these demographic areas that are lagging. Number 8 was a little bit more technical. This is about methods to exempt miles that are driven on private roads or out of state. So for those who choose a technology approach, an automated method, it's going to be automatic. If you drive out of state, those miles will not be reported for billing. For those who choose a manual method, we're developing a web form that you can submit for a refund of miles driven out of state. In a real system, this type of approach, I think we talked about this at maybe it was the December meeting, this could be sort of an opportunity for fraud. In the pilot, we want to test that people understand how to use it, and we'll be examining whether and how people submit these types of claims for out-of-state mileage refunds if they're on a manual method. Data security features. This was, I apologize, I left these for last, but this was the order they were in. And also the privacy features, which are built into the choices and the way that the pilot is designed. But the data security in particular, we're building to the recommendations that you all made, and we're going to verify with an independent verification that all the account managers meet those security features. The account managers are currently developing their mileage reporting and accounting and invoicing systems and their customer service systems. And I believe that we just started the verification process to make sure that the data security components are met. One piece, based on strong feedback we got from everyone who came to the industry forum, was to recommend 128-bit AES encryption rather than 256. I wish Matthew Dorfman were here to explain exactly what that means. I believe it was also something that you talked about with Gautam Hans. Right, Mitch?
Yes. I called him. He had no concerns about the change.
And just to add a little bit more background on data encryption, my understanding based on some white papers I read is that there are sort of 3 choices for encryption, and the 256-bit is used by military grade sort of top secret data storage. And currently it provides, 128-bit provides similar level of security. 256-bit AES is built in theory to withstand a quantum computing attack. We don't have quantum computers yet, so I don't think we need to worry about it for the pilot. So this is sort of the dashboard of those 9 recommendations. We've given ourselves check marks on most of them. Number 7 is the recruitment. 99%, that will stay at 99% until we fill all the demographic targets. We've got 99% means, yeah, we've got 5,000 people signed up, but we're not going to consider it done until we meet all the demographic targets.
And on number 9, the 9 out of 10, is that because of that other item you just mentioned?
Yes.
Okay.
Quick run through of the schedule of what we're going to be doing over the next 2.5 months. So there's 3 rounds of testing to make sure that the account managers and the technologies that we're setting up to run the pilot are in good working order before we actually ask volunteers to begin the pilot. So unit testing, which is basically taking all of the individual components that go into a road charge, whether it's technology or manual aspects or accounting aspects, and testing them individually. That'll be underway from now until mid-April. And for that aspect, we're having our partners basically make sure that their systems comply with those 3 documents I showed you at the beginning, the interface control document, and the specifications document, the ConOps, so that they'll be making sure that what they've built is in compliance with those documents. Integration testing follows that. That's where we actually put the pieces together and make sure that they work well together in accordance with the interface control document. That will be in the latter half of April. Then we do sort of a live trial, short term. This is sort of like a mini pilot within a pilot, calling it end-to-end testing. This will be in Sacramento the week of May 16th. And for any of you who actually live in Sacramento, we'd be happy to have volunteers. We're actually going to have about 50 or so vehicles, Caltrans employees, doing this end-to-end testing with us. This is sort of the dress rehearsal, work the bugs out. So we'll have the various operational concepts running for about a week. So if you live in Sacramento and want to be part of that, let us know. Contact Mitch or Brady or myself even, and we'll make sure that if you're in town that week and you're happy to do some of the trial runs we have. For some folks who have location-based reporting, we may ask you to drive to Reno and back to make sure that it works. And if you're not interested in committing to that much, on May 18th, I believe in the afternoon, it hasn't been said exactly which time yet, there will be sort of a public open for inspection for those of you who would like to come attend and take a look at what it would look like, basically what the billing systems look like, and our account managers will be there with us to help walk through the end-to-end testing. So May 18th, if you're around in Sacramento, please come by. We'll send more details.
That'd be cool. We can provide some more specific information to the TAC.
Sure.
In anticipation of that, yeah.
Lastly, I mentioned before the data security verification, which is underway right now. That will wrap up by mid-May. And that's basically before we start, we want to make sure that everything meets those data security requirements. It's not something we want to find out after the fact wasn't working, so we're going to do that right now. So that's the update on pilot sort of technical aspects. Be happy to address any questions.
Wow, what an outstanding report, Travis, and it really shows us all of the good work that you guys have done in taking the direction from this task force and making it move forward. So thank you for that. And I feel really good about seeing that matrix. I think you're with the targets, with the targeted marketing, the digital marketing that Brady talked about. I feel pretty confident we're going to hit that. So thank you. Any questions from members of the task force? All right, hearing none. And I think since we've just got a couple more items on the agenda, unless there's disagreement, I figured we just plow through without taking a break for lunch. Is that okay? All right, that sounds good. We're going to let Mr. Finnegan leave. We're going to let Mr. Finnegan go have his lunch break. All right, so with that, we're going to get to hear from Mike Warren of CH2M Hill, and to make that introduction on item 8 on the agenda, the pilot evaluation plan, we'll get back to Brady.
Thank you, Chairman Daffer. We, as you're well aware, we've hired an independent evaluator to team up with us as part of the pilot program. The firm was announced, I believe, in December, but it's CH2M Hill. And a couple milestones I wanted to hit on before I hand it over to Mike Warren is our contract was executed on January 6th. We gave the notice to proceed to CH2M Hill on February 1st. We held an outstanding kickoff meeting where we got to meet not only CH2M Hill and the various partners that are involved from their firm, but also the subcontracting contractors that they've also teamed up with to fulfill the different elements of the evaluation contract. That happened on February 11th, and in between that time and now, we've been meeting bi-weekly to discuss a number of different deliverables that are moving forward, primarily things like the baseline project and deliverable schedule, a traceability matrix that actually links the different categories that you, TAC members, recommended to evaluate against in the pilot program, and right now, we're working hard to get some interview guides up and running. And so Mike's gonna talk about it a little more, but I want to introduce Mike Warren, the project manager for CH2M Hill, and let him tell you more about the pilot evaluation plan.
Welcome, Mike. Mike was also at the mileage-based user fee meeting in DC in February.
Thank you, Chairman Dafford. Thank you, panel members, and thank you, Brady. So yeah, we are working with Caltrans to evaluate this pilot program. We are, as Brady said, we are well underway right now. We're going through a lot of the planning aspects, getting ready for moving forward to the evaluation and evaluating the performance of this pilot against the objectives that the TAC has established and ratified throughout this process. So there's 4 companies on our team. CH2M, we will be the project management, technical evaluation, report writing, and doing a lot of the internal interviews. We've hired EMC Research out of the Bay Area to do the surveys, focus groups, a lot of the participant opinion data, a lot of the attitudinal measures, things like that. System Metrics Group is our data modeling expert. They're actually really headquartered in Southern California, but they have a lot of experience throughout the state doing transportation data analytics. And then Vertec Company is our DBE sub. They're going to be supporting us in some of the operational and internal interviews, as well as doing some of the financial analyses. So, kind of working backwards on this, there's really 4 key deliverables that we'll be providing to Caltrans and subsequently the TAC. The 4 different reports that will define the program: the public outreach report, focus group report, pilot delivery team interviews report, and then the data analysis and results. All of those will include a legislative briefing, an executive summary, identification of key results and trends, really identifying the root causes for what's worked well, what hasn't worked well, and why those things are working well or maybe not working well. We're also going to provide a legislative executive summary that really comprises the results of all 4 reports into a single briefing. All the reports will map to the recommended evaluation criteria in SB 1077. So the participant surveys, yes.
Does the work plan provide for the TAC to review drafts of the reports before they're finalized, or will we see them after they're final, just as do the legislators and others?
I think the expectation is, the TAC will be able to review them. We'll be submitting them to Caltrans in draft form, and then Caltrans will be working with the TAC to review those draft reports prior to release. Any other questions?
Just to follow up on that point, because I think we did have a bit of a discussion about that, and I think there was definitely a desire expressed by the TAC to see some of those materials. Not to belabor the issue or delay things, but to have an opportunity to review, even if not at a meeting, but even offline, for some feedback. I think that would be very useful. And also, the timing, I think, with the new sort of accelerated timing, is you're going to have a final report delivery not too long after the pilot is done. So obviously, there's going to be parallel work going on, I assume.
Absolutely.
And I think that as that's developing and as any findings or recommendations or whatever are coming out, we'd love to see that.
Absolutely. Yeah, our goal with this. So our plan is to have all of the reports submitted by the 1st of May of 2017. The expectation is that we will be providing a series of interim drafts, interim deliverables throughout the process to Caltrans, and then Caltrans will be working to disseminate those copies to the TAC for review. Okay, so the participant surveys, we will be doing these electronically as well as up to 200 printed copies for dissemination. We will be doing these at various intervals, pre-pilot, mid-pilot, post-pilot. We also are going to do surveys, trigger-based surveys, based on certain things that happen over the course of a pilot. If a participant changes their account management option, or if a participant drops out of the program, or when a participant first receives their invoice, we want to know what their initial reactions are, what their thoughts are, and why they've done the things they've done. So we'll be surveying them at obviously various time-based stages, but also trigger-based as well. And these surveys are really going to be both experiential as well as attitudinal. How the pilot's working for you, what's working well, what's not working well, what could be improved, as well as attitudinal. What's a participant's opinion of road charging as a whole? What is their understanding of road charging from before they sign up to the program all the way to now? And has that knowledge and have any attitudes changed over the course of the program? We are going to tie surveys to unique identifiers to identify how participants are surveying, not just at an aggregate level, but we're also going to tie this to demographics and specific participants. So we want to make sure that if participant number one, and we won't know for the purposes of protecting privacy, we won't know who participant number one is. We'll just know them as participant one. We want to make sure that they are surveyed pre, mid, post, as well as at any trigger-based occurrences throughout the program.
I had a quick question. So,
Yes.
and you may have said this, and if you have, I apologize. So all surveys and focus groups will be exclusively within the universe of the volunteer group. Is that right?
That's correct.
And therefore, I think that if you're doing opinion elements of this, tracking that over time, I think is very useful and informative. But trying to draw some broader understanding of opinions, we have to be cautious with, because this is obviously a self-selected group that we're working with.
And we are relying heavily on the recruitment demographics. The matrix that Travis and Brady showed earlier, that the participant pool is reflective of the overall state demographics.
True, but again, they were still self-selected. So there's I don't want to get too carried away with some generalized opinions that some people may interpret as reflecting the state when it may not be.
Fair enough.
And if I could, this is what, a 6-month pilot, is that it?
9.
9 month, and you've got a minimum of 3 surveys?
Time-based, yes.
And
Pre, mid, and post, yes.
Sorry?
Pre-survey,
Right.
pre-pilot survey, mid-pilot survey, and
So there's a
post-pilot.
minimum of 3 surveys plus perhaps others that are trigger-based.
Yes.
Are you at all concerned that there might be some survey fatigue that works into this?
There could be, and that's always a concern with this. We are working with Caltrans to identify potential incentives to get participants to continue through the survey process, whether it's something as simple as putting them in a drawing for an iPad, but something that can keep them engaged throughout the process. We're trying to be as hands-off as possible. We still need to be as engaged as much as possible. So all of our surveys are going to be web-based. They're going to be very simple to use. We don't expect any survey to take more than probably 10 minutes to complete by any participant at any given time. So we want to prevent fatigue, and the only way.
Are there any incentives built into the contract with EMC to make sure that the survey responses are high?
There are. We're actually discussing that with Caltrans now as potential incentives. Really, those are geared more towards the focus groups. Getting participants in a room for a couple of hours, you got to feed them, you've got to incentivize them, or they'll never show up. And don't give them anything to drink. But the thought is, yes, we are going to offer some sort of incentives, and we're working with Caltrans right now to define what those may be.
Not to the contractor, though.
I'm sorry?
But That's all right. I don't want to belabor this. Thanks.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'll just pick that up for just a tiny second. I think keeping people engaged and keeping them as much as possible through the end is important. So I'm assuming you guys and the whole process will be updating us as it goes along.
Absolutely.
And if there is a drop-off for any reason, that maybe some corrective action could occur to pull that back.
Absolutely. Our hope is, we will, through these unique identifiers, and through, using the web type surveys, we can actually identify who's surveying, how often they're surveying, how long it's taking them to do the surveys, and really tweak on the fly.
Yeah, but even keeping them in the program, I mean, that whole engagement, communication, and everything else, we don't want too much of a drop-off, obviously.
Was there any thought about a survey that goes back out to the public like we did when we were first kicking this thing off to kind of see how opinions have changed, if any, one way or the other?
I don't recall if that's in our work plan or not, but we can certainly talk about it.
Yeah.
And see if it
No,
makes
it just,
sense.
and the reason I ask this is the obvious, is the survey or the pilot matures out. We've gone through the 9-month process.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to be looking at potentially some kind of legislative action that the state may want to engage in. And I think that clearly the lawmakers and members of the legislature, obviously, and certainly others would be interested in knowing if the needle is moved one way or the other.
Absolutely. No, I think, to Norma's point, it's a good idea. It's definitely worth considering. We're looking at this, because currently we're focused on the participants. These pre-pilot surveys are really going to establish the baseline. And then we'll, over the course of the program, through follow-up surveys, we'll really do a trend analysis and to see how these baseline conditions have evolved over the course of the pilot, both positively and negatively.
Well, and I'm just realizing, I don't think we talked about this when we actually put this whole thing together in some of our early meetings. So anyway, just something that we might want to give some
Absolutely.
consideration to. And I know maybe we could talk about that as we come forward on
I'm
Terry's
sorry.
item with the update on funding.
Just one other question, just because this is all brand new to me as well. Do you intend? I'm not sure who this question is to, but do you intend when we actually tell the participants we're ready to go? Maybe this is to Mitch, that we're ready to go. This is going to happen, and we're giving you all this information, that we're going to let them know that they're going to have a lot of surveys, that we're going to be asking for a lot of information, and so they're not surprised, or at least they can't claim to be surprised once they start getting all of this request for feedback. So it would I think it would behoove us to make sure that
Gary can answer that question because the intent is yes.
Yeah, yes, definitely. Once they have been selected, we will give them a complete instructions of, okay, here's what your next step. During the process, we'll be asking you to participate in surveys, as well as potentially participate in a focus group. So yes, it'll be a clear definition of the steps ahead throughout the pilot program, so they know what they're getting themselves into.
And there is some beauty, at least from the evaluation and survey perspective, that this is an opt-in program. Whereas participants are opting in, they are more apt to conduct surveys. They're really more apt to provide as much information as they possibly can. Whereas with a mandatory program, you might have more people shying away from that. So any more questions? All right. With the focus groups, we're going to do 5 focus groups. Right now, they are expected to occur throughout the state at various either Caltrans district offices, CH2M offices, or off-site locations. We are going to recruit the focus group participants based on certain demographics in the recruiting plan, kind of tying back to that matrix. And we also may subdivide those focus groups based on account management types or options. Again, we'll take the survey question. These will really be, the survey is concentrated. We'll expand on the experiential, we'll expand on the attitudinal, and really gain an understanding. We're going to video these focus groups in accordance with our contract, and then provide all that information to Caltrans and the TAC. These questions are going to be, obviously, we'll ask the quantitative, rate on a scale of 1 to 5. What works well, how do you feel about things, but we also want to get some open-ended questions as well. Ask the questions, start identifying what key words are coming up or what trends are coming up in these questions. And then the PDT interviews. We are currently doing 3 sets of 7 interviews, pre, mid, and post again. That will include interviews with Caltrans, obviously Travis and his team, the account managers, focusing on how the pilot has been deployed, how well it's operating, how it's technically compliant. We'll be reviewing all the technical test documentation from the unit testing, the integration testing, and the end-to-end testing. Again, doing trend analyses to see what's worked well, what hasn't worked well over the course of the program. We're also going to evaluate all the programmatic documentation, and there's a ton of it. Looking not just at the TAC briefings, but a lot of the contract documentation that was provided or has been developed for this program. So some of our key milestone dates, next month we'll be doing a planning workshop with Caltrans to finalize the evaluation plan, do a lot of logistical coordination for deploying the evaluation. We've developed an objectives traceability matrix, which takes the TAC evaluation measures and puts definitive steps behind those. That's really going to be the foundation for deploying this evaluation. We'll be doing surveys between May and July, October, November, and then January through March. Focus groups February through March of next year, with PDT interviews starting sometime mid-June. Again, all evaluation reports and briefings to be provided no later than May 9th of next year. So, if there's no other questions, thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions?
Yes, Professor White.
Marty?
Will the data, the survey results,
Yes.
the films of the focus groups, be in the public realm? Will it be in the public domain? Will a citizen or an organization that is either pro or con this program be able to request access to it?
They could. I think we would need to further define that with Caltrans as what could be considered public record, what could be pulled under FOIA. What's out there. We want to keep any data that we provide, we're going to anonymize to the fullest extent possible. There won't be much on the data. It's going to be really the meat of it will be in the reports, the results in the reports.
We can follow up on that. I
Yeah.
don't know the answer at this point.
Well, I'm not sure that I'm advocating it. I just want to understand the situation.
Honestly, I see it as a potential risk. To be perfectly candid with you, we're going to collect a lot of data, and we're going to take this data and put it into a model, or a modeling suite that's going to conduct all these analytics against this data. We will provide the raw data to Caltrans. I guess I would recommend that it not be made public. However, the results of that analysis should
Mike,
be.
we'll look into that further and then
Yeah.
share it back with the TAC.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's also some direction in SB 1077 regarding this issue.
Any other questions for Mike? Well, outstanding. It looks like you've got a great plan put together going forward, and we'll look forward to regular updates.
Thank you.
And one of the things I should just tell members of the TAC that are here, Mitch Weiss, working with the Caltrans staff, is going to begin following this meeting regular updates to members of the TAC via email. He and I talked about that earlier today to keep everybody here in the loop as to how things are moving along. It may be a real short item, but also could be at length. So who am I calling on next, Mitch or Carrie, for item 9? Well, it looks like Mitch is getting up, so we'll start with Mitch. He's grabbed the clicker. This is item 9 on the agenda, which is update on Caltrans's efforts to seek additional funding under the FAST Act.
I'll be providing a brief update of what's in the FAST Act in terms of funding for this type of activity, and then Carrie will go into what Caltrans's efforts are. In the FAST Act is funding to study user-based fees. They have a number of things that they're looking for in terms of testing design, increasing public awareness, et cetera. And they have in the statute a number of things that the grantees have to address. Many of these are very similar to the things that we are looking at. One of the differences is market-based congestion, if appropriate. So that has come up a couple of times today, variable pricing. And so that's one thing they want to look at, if appropriate. There's also a number of things that they're looking at as optional. Again, a couple of these are similar to many of the things we're looking at, although I would note they have the ability to audit and enforce as one of the things they're looking as a possibility for grantees to address. There are other considerations they're going to have. First off, they want some geographic diversity in where they're giving grants. The federal funding is no more than 50% of the activity, and there's annual reporting that goes along with it, and it's pretty specific what they're looking for. In terms of the amount of funding available, there's $15 million this year and $20 million in the next 4 years after that. Key is that this may be redirected by August 1st to a different program if there's not sufficient interest. Now, it's the statute says may, so that in Washington they have some discretion, but that's a very short deadline for states to meet, particularly states who don't have any sort of legislative approval to do a pilot. So I know that's going to be a challenge for many states. With that, I'll hand it off to Carrie, and she will go over what Caltrans is doing to go after some of this money.
Thank you, Mitch, and Chairman and committee members. It was kind of mentioned earlier, some of the things that we are pursuing at this point. Just to let you know, the guidelines have not been issued. We're anticipating them to be out later this month, with applications due in May. So it's a very short turnaround. We have no idea what the guidelines will say, what the requirements are. As Mitch went over, there's lots of shalls and mays and should've, could'ves. I mean, it is going to have a lot of requirements for us to meet, but based on our pilot program that we have now, we feel that we can pursue something that would address all the needs and requirements of the grant program. We have talked to TCA here about potentially putting together a pilot looking at the tolling aspect as well as road charge. We are, the pay at the pump option that Jim mentioned, we have, and Norma had talked about, we are meeting with them. It is a very attractive looking option for us to pursue. We're also looking at contactless payment. Visa has a program in place that they're partnering with Honda and doing some type of contactless payment option. So we're kind of investigating that, as well as connected vehicles. That's something that the department has been pursuing for a number of years, and there's some potential there. As Norma mentioned, the Western Road Usage Charge Consortium is looking at some type of regional pilot. At this time, we are looking at options of developing a pilot that potentially could start off small, maybe in California, and then in subsequent years, other states could join as their programs mature. But that we're currently fleshing that out, that option out. So we have a very limited time frame to put together an idea and then the grant application, but we are seriously considering it, and we feel that we're in a very good position to pursue grant funds.
I had just a quick question back on slide 4, and I'm sorry, Mitch, if you already covered this. The item D there, the market-based congestion mitigation, if appropriate, did you touch on that?
It's not clear what if appropriate means.
Okay.
That's one of the things.
So that's their if appropriate, not our if
it says
appropriate?
It says shall and if appropriate, which seem to be somewhat contradictory ideas. I cannot enlighten you on what.
It's not a
what
requirement.
Yeah,
It's specifically listed under shall.
Yeah, and I guess, and obviously, how things are developed to get funding, I understand. We want to make that as attractive as possible to those who are reviewing it. But at the same time, that gets in an area that's been discussed here many times as a challenging area moving forward, to say the least.
Right, and it could be stating, California has very congested areas, whereas in Idaho, maybe they don't have so much congested areas. So maybe it's where appropriate, if you're doing a pilot program in the LA Basin, you may want to look at this might need to be incorporated.
or-
That's my interpretation.
Or a statewide charge with no location or time pricing differentials in California is all congestion pricing.
Exactly.
Other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. All right, let's look at our next item on the agenda, and that would be item 10, and these are the policy issues, and we'll give it to Mitch to kick that off with Travis.
Sure. Travis will be presenting this item. I just wanted to frame it a little bit. This item lists the policy issues that agency is going to have to address in its final report, along with several other policy issues that arose during the TAC process. In the items, a schedule for when we anticipate bringing these items to the TAC. These are not issues that require the TAC to take a formal position. Rather, the input from the TAC and received at the TAC meetings can be used to inform the reports that agency and later the CTC have to do. And with that, I'll hand it over to Travis.
Mr. Dunn.
Tell someone very tall was here. For me. Thanks, Mitch. This, to me, is a really fun part of this project. As Mitch mentioned, SB 1077 calls out the items listed on the left column of the table on slide 2 that must be addressed in CalSTA's final report to the legislature. A lot of these issues have already been discussed by this committee over the last year in phase 1, so that's what phase 1 means. Phase 1 means 2015. And we're going to learn a lot more about some of these issues through the pilot test. But the interesting piece of this policy analysis to me is that there are some things that we can learn from the pilot test. There are some things we can't learn from a pilot test. And there are some things that we can learn more about by doing additional analysis beyond the pilot test. So what this slide is meant to convey is that we're doing a lot of additional analysis outside of the scope of the 5,000 or so volunteers testing various methods to analyze the data from the pilot test, to analyze institutional data, to analyze legal precedents and a host of other issues in order to provide CalSTA and also you all as TAC members with background information in order to make as well informed as possible decisions and recommendations to the legislature about what to do about these issues in the final report. So what we've done is we kind of taken this list and we also looked back at what we had maintained last year and called the parking lot of issues that came up during meetings that we either didn't have time or scope to address last year or weren't going to be addressing head on in the pilot, and they're listed here. So how to transition if a decision is made in the future to implement a road charge, how do you transition to that? What is the impact on alternative fuel electric vehicles? Equity implications came up over and over again. We'll get some information from the pilot about that, but there's still more analysis beyond the pilot we can do. And then the last two closely related, the urban versus rural issue, it's come up several times today again. And I think it just as important or tied to that in some ways, long distance commuters, particularly we're here in Southern California, and we heard last year from a lot of folks in Riverside County, for example. I recall a lot of concerns about long commutes in Southern California and what does that mean for those types of commuters. So it's not just necessarily an urban versus rural issue. It's how much do you drive and how does that impact each individual. So we want to take a lot of information, not only from the pilot, but also from institutional sources in order to provide a little bit of background on these questions. And what we've done on the next two slides, I won't read every golden word, but we've tried to sort of schedule. So this is a preview of coming attractions. We don't have anything to dig into today as far as analysis because we're just beginning to do those analyses, but we wanted to let you know what's on deck, what's coming up in the remaining quarterly meetings for the TAC. So in June, we'll be addressing income equity and jurisdictional issues, and that specifically relates to the out-of-state jurisdictional issues. In the September meeting, we'll be talking about the relationship between a road charge and electric vehicle or alternative fuel vehicle adoption, and an issue that I know is one that's a lot of fun to talk about, which is the use of revenues. We've heard a little about that today as well. So what we'd like to do is provide a little bit of background data to inform that conversation here with this group. In December, as we get closer to the end of the pilot, we'll talk about potential transition strategies, in-state jurisdictional issues as opposed to out-of-state jurisdictional issues, and then the rate setting issue. And when we talk about rates, it'll be more of a meta discussion. It's not so much what should the rate be, but what are the parameters, who should set a rate, how should they set the rate, what's the basis, those types of questions. And those will be important factors to provide guidance in the final report that CalSTA will be issuing. Next year in March and June are the tentative months for quarterly meetings in 2017. So in the tentatively scheduled March meeting, we'll look at the urban and rural and long distance commuter issue, and we'll have some at least preliminary data from the pilot in addition to the institutional data to inform that discussion. And then we'll continue the discussion on jurisdictional issues. You can see that some of these topics repeat because they're probably going to merit more than one meeting's worth of conversations. That's why they repeat. And then we wrap up in June, I think appropriately, with a discussion on transition strategies, carry forward the urban, rural, and long-distance commuter discussion, and also bring back the income equity discussion, because by that time we'll have additional information from the pilot. So that's the preview of coming attractions. If you have any questions or suggestions.
Keep that slide up if you could. Well, let's see if there's any questions or comments from folks. Issues, concerns? Norma?
One quick comment on some of these items. I am expecting that other parts of the administration beyond the department are going to be engaged in some of this conversation. Rate setting being one.
Well, I think one thing for clarification on these policy items that you're bringing forward for consideration. The statute, the requirement for the reporting on, for example, the use of the revenues really is the transportation agency. And so when you bring an item like that forward, you're not expecting any action on the part of the TAC members, or so when you do bring that forward, what are you expecting of the TAC?
Yeah, on none of these do we expect the TAC to take a formal action or to take a position. Rather, we want to inform, essentially issue papers, if you will, something that can be provided to agency to say, the TAC has a broad background and much more varied than might be sitting around the table at any one government department talking about how this might work. We're reaching out to a lot of people, and so we want to inform the decisions that are being made by agency and then later the CTC. So it's really just to get your input and to get the public's input on these key issues and help inform the recommendation that ultimately has to be made by agency.
Any other questions or comments on it?
I have one comment to add on to what Mitch is saying. This will all be coming back to you. It'll be coming back to the legislature, the CTC, and the Technical Advisory Committee when we're done. So this is an opportunity for you to get a preview of the information that will be presented in the final draft and to start developing what your recommendations might be to CTC and ultimately CTC to the legislature.
So just to clarify, when this is brought back, when these issues are brought back, they will be brought back to the TAC members in the form of what you're envisioning from an administrative standpoint as far as recommendations?
It might not necessarily be recommendations. It is the data and the narrative of the results of the data. I mean, at this point, it's hard to say what type of recommendations we'll be bringing forward from the administration standpoint. I mean, that's really the role of the CTC to make recommendations to the legislature on the final report.
Are you trying to get, there's something going on here which I can't quite figure out. Is what I'm hearing that you're eventually going to have these recommendations, these policy issues, and eventually you're going to have these recommendations that the agency is tasked with giving to the legislature. Are you looking for some kind of a sign off by the TAC for those recommendations? I mean, otherwise, why are you bringing it to us? We're not supposed to be part of the recommendation process.
It's an informational item, and getting your input into the process and seeing whether or not we are headed in the right direction, and if we need to tweak our study in any manner. I mean, that's really the intent of bringing it back to the TAC. You are our advisory committee to assist us in crafting a report.
On certain issues.
Correct.
Can I address that? We're not looking for sign-off. It is an information item. The administration, CalSTA in this case, is required to address this in a final report. Maybe the commission might ask you for input when they develop their assessment and issue a report to the legislature. But for us, it's really to share that information. It's an informational item. There is no action required, correct, Carrie?
Correct.
And I think, again, and I understand, Lauren, where you're coming from on this. You know, we clearly want to see what comes back first. But at the same time, the input of this group is valued by the CTC, which is tasked with providing recommendations to the legislature. So we want to hear the good, bad, and the ugly. And if there's, you know, any of those issues along the way, I think we want to make sure that we're in the loop. So does that address your concern, Lauren, or do you want to be more specific as to what you don't want us to be talking about until a certain date? Think about it. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. And that's the beauty of this. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. Oh, one more. I'm sorry. Lisa. Supervisor.
Just out of curiosity, so the 1.5 cents a mile that we're going to charge in the pilot, does that include both state and federal gas tax, or just state?
Just state.
Just state.
And the rate has not yet been set. That is a discussion that we're undertaking in the administration, and we will need to come up with a rate before the pilot goes live. So the rate has not yet been set.
Okay, because I was just calculating at a penny. I was curious at a penny and a half that we were been talking about. So if you've got the rural area with the car that only gets 15 miles a gallon, and you drive 50,000 miles a year, so that's 3,333 gallons. If you multiply that by just by the state tax of the 40.62 cents, comes out to $1,354. So if you then look at the VMT program with the 50,000 miles times the 1.5 cents, that's $750. So if you've got the car that it's not as fuel efficient, you're actually going to have a savings in the road usage charge program of $604. Now on the flip side, if you have a Prius and you get 50 miles to the gallon, under the program, you're going to be paying in California $344 more. So just doing some quick calculations, I thought it was very interesting.
I think she's channeling Will Kempton, because that's exactly what he would do.
Yes, exactly.
As a Prius driver, I now withdraw from the as a volunteer.
It's not real money.
And then the other point, though, I think this committee had mentioned or had indicated several times that the idea is to be revenue neutral.
Right.
Certainly in the pilot, and what may happen longer term is another story. So I'm assuming you're going to be. That's how you're going to be trying to arrive at your number.
And just to get what Supervisor Bartlett was talking about, assuming 1.5 cents a mile, which is an assumption, who knows where we'll land, that's the 20 miles per gallon is what that equates to. So if your car is less fuel efficient than 20 miles to gallon, then at a penny and a half a mile you benefit. And so the 20 miles per gallon is where
that's the
tipping
break
point is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's roughly the average of the on-road fleet now, not necessarily the average of what new cars are being sold at.
Yes.
Well, and as an electric car driver, I can't wait to be able to start paying my fair share. Yeah, exactly. Simulating payment. Thank you, Professor. Okay, well, that's great. I appreciate those things. Let's go to item 11 on the agenda, which is our typical review of what we've talked about. Were there any things in the parking lot? We'll go to Mitch to see if there's any additional items we want to be bringing back to our June meeting.
Well, I have not so much things that we have to bring back in June, but follow up at whatever point in time is appropriate. We talked about getting a better way to explain how rural drivers might benefit. So I was just having a little aside earlier with Carrie that maybe we can come up with some graphic that we can kind of show that'll show that a little clearer, that it depends on the kind of car you're driving, and that you're 85% of what you're paying is the price of gas, not the tax. Then as we mentioned earlier, I'll send out a weekly update on where we are with volunteers to the TAC members, so we can know which of our cubby holes needs to be filled more. we'll look at the potential for a more general public survey in terms of the road charge, as was mentioned, and then look into whether or not any raw data from the evaluation is going to be made publicly available, needs to be made publicly available.
Anything else that may have been left off? All right, thank you very much. Let's see if we have any members of the public that wish to weigh in. Some of you have been sitting here patiently listening to us. Seeing nobody? Nothing? Any other members of the TAC wish to weigh in on items? Eric?
Yeah, I have one more comment and just kind of a cautionary comment. What kind of concerns me is when the package is delivered and you throw it across the street for deliberation and it goes through the process through the legislature. I just hope that what concerns me is kind of like what I call the Christmas tree, adding ornaments to the Christmas tree, where we've had, over the past year, we've had comments from the public, and I think there's been comments at a few meetings about based on weight size of vehicles, charging for that, and then also congestion pricing's been thrown out. And what concerns me is I just hope that those types of things don't get looped into what we're ultimately working on here. And I just wanted to float that up because, I'm just doing my due diligence for my organization. So that's the concern I have.
Well, I want to respond to that. I share that concern. I do think that if we've jumped 20 years out, there's probably going to be more of that. Obviously, I think Supervisor Bartlett raised an issue that I recall some time back, and I think very legitimately so. This could be an issue into the future where, even as we are sitting here at TCA, as technology advances, they don't need the little fast-track transponder in the vehicle. And, perhaps there might be congestion-based pricing depending on the time of the day and that part of the area. I mean, clearly those are things. London started congestion-based pricing, 20 years ago?
Yeah, and San Francisco, sorry to interrupt, Jim. San Francisco is, they're looking at rolling out a pilot for congestion pricing on kind of a small scale, very isolated area. But they're doing it, I don't want to say there's a right way and the wrong way, but we're a little bit more, I don't want to say supportive, but we're not blowing up like a Roman candle on this one, because what they're doing is they're just focusing on businesses that are open 24/7. So you have your hospitality folks, you have your hospitals, stuff like that. The problem is with congestion pricing is if you go with a flat congestion pricing, a lot of these businesses aren't open to receive the goods. And so the trucker is at the mercy of the customer of when they can ship and receive the goods. And so that type of congestion pricing for that type of business possibly could work, but just a blanket congestion pricing does not work at all.
Lisa?
And then at the IBTTA conference, there was a comment on one of the panel members, I think it was on Jim's panel, where the individual is on the far right, mentioned premium versus regular pricing. So you should charge more on a vehicle miles traveled basis if you're on a premium road like a toll road or a toll lane. And I thought, oh my gosh, interesting discussion. But that lends itself to a whole nother layer of complexity, bondholders and fairness and so on. But people are thinking of a lot of creative ideas out there about, what to throw into this road usage charge program. And we've got to filter things out to really narrow down the scope of what we want here.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember when Sonoma came and testified one time and they said, people gas up in Oakland and in San Francisco, they drive into Sonoma, they use all our roads, and then they leave and they gas up again outside of Sonoma. We don't get the benefit. So you're going to get that. It's an interesting thing. I think that's where state way out. Yeah, we haven't even begun to figure out if this will even work yet. But this is one step along the way, and I really want to express my appreciation to the members of the task force that were able to make it here today. We will, through our updated and regular communication that we're going to start beginning next week, endeavor to get every member of the task force at our meeting in Sacramento. It will be back in the basement of the Caltrans headquarters where we've met before on the 24th of June. So with that, hearing nothing else, this meeting